I am Simone, 35 years old, and my mother-in-law had absolutely no idea I was secretly paying $5,000 a month to keep her precious family legacy afloat. She slid a 30-day eviction notice across my own mahogany dining table, demanding I move out so her oldest daughter and her entitled husband could start a family in my home. She thought she had me cornered. But instead of crying, I smiled, picked up my phone, and packed everything up in a flash, taking the very walls down around her. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who severely underestimated your worth. The disrespect reached its peak last Sunday. I had prepared our traditional Sunday dinner, a ritual I kept alive to honor my late husband Jamal, who passed away 2 years ago. But his mother, Beatrice, always treated my home like her personal kingdom. She sat at the dining table, swirling the expensive wine I had purchased, while her daughter Chloe sat silently admiring her fresh manicure. Chloe's husband Tyler was busy complaining about how small their current apartment was. Without a word of gratitude for the meal, Beatrice reached into her purse, pulled out a crisp legal document, and tossed it across the polished wood. It stopped right next to my plate. Beatrice looked at me with cold, calculating eyes and declared that my grieving period was officially over. She stated that Jamal's house was meant for his real family, and since Tyler and Chloe were ready for children, they needed the space. Tyler smirked, leaning forward to add that it was time the actual heirs reclaimed the estate. Beatrice operated under the grand delusion that Jamal had bought this luxury home entirely in cash before his passing. She saw me as nothing more than a charity case squatting on their family wealth. She had no clue that Jamal died drowning in debt, and my corporate salary as a senior wealth management advisor was the only thing standing between her and total financial ruin. Beatrice tapped her manicured index finger against the stark white paper of the eviction notice. 30 days, Simone, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I think that is more than generous considering how long you have been living here rent-free. It is time for you to move into an apartment more suited for a single woman. This house is a family estate now. Chloe did not even look up. She just kept filing her nails, blowing the dust off her acrylics as if my entire life being uprooted was merely a minor inconvenience to her Sunday afternoon. She was always the golden child, pampered and protected from any real responsibility. Tyler leaned back in his chair, patting his stomach full of the prime rib I had paid for and roasted myself. He looked around my impeccably decorated formal dining room with a look of greedy satisfaction. It is just the natural order of things, Simone, he said, flashing a patronizing smile. Chloe and I are starting a traditional family. A house this size needs a real father figure and children to fill the halls. It is what Jamal would have wanted for his sister. We will be taking the master suite, of course. I looked at the three of them. The absolute audacity hung in the air, thick and suffocating. They were sitting at a custom dining table I had commissioned from Italy, eating a meal I spent 6 hours preparing, inside a house that I was single-handedly keeping out of foreclosure. And they were kicking me out. Any other woman might have shattered in that moment. I could have screamed. I could have cried. I could have thrown my wine glass against the wall and demanded respect. I could have easily dropped the truth bomb right then and there, telling them that Jamal's life insurance barely covered his funeral, let alone this $2 million property. I could have explained that Jamal had a terrible habit of taking out hidden loans to fund his mother's lavish lifestyle, leaving me to clean up the financial wreckage after his death. But as a wealth management advisor, I deal in calculated returns, not emotional outbursts. I realized long ago that arguing with fools only drags you down to their level. If they wanted the house so desperately, they could have it. They could have every single inch of the crippling debt attached to it. Instead of crying, I simply picked up my phone from the table and smiled. "What is so funny?" Beatrice snapped, her eyes narrowing as my calmness unsettled her. "You always had a disrespectful streak, Simone. You never appreciated what my son provided for you." I did not answer her. I unlocked my screen and dialed a number I had saved for emergencies, putting the call on speakerphone for the entire table to hear. A cheerful voice echoed through the dining room. Apex Premium Moving and Storage, how can I help you today? Yes, I need to book a full commercial team for a complete estate pack and move, I said, keeping my voice steady and professional. I need them here tomorrow morning at 8 sharp. Tomorrow? Beatrice scoffed, exchanging a confused look with Chloe. You do not need to be dramatic, Simone. You have 30 days. We are not throwing you out on the street tonight. I ignored her and confirmed the booking with the dispatcher. I gave them my corporate credit card number and ended the call. I then stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt, and began stacking the dinner plates. Since the house is yours now, Tyler, I said pleasantly, you can handle the dishes. Tyler stood up, puffing out his chest, trying to use his height to intimidate me. Listen here, Simone, you cannot just pack up everything. The furniture belongs to the house. Jamal bought this furniture. It stays with the property. Chloe finally looked up from her nails, her voice whiny and entitled. Yeah, Simone. We are keeping the bedroom sets and the living room sectionals. You can take your clothes and your little knickknacks, but the actual furniture is ours. We cannot start a family in an empty house. I walked over to the entryway console and picked up the heavy brass spare keyring. I walked back and dropped it directly onto Tyler's empty plate. It made a loud, satisfying clatter that made Beatrice jump. I will leave exactly what Jamal paid for, I replied smoothly. Every single item he purchased will remain right where it is. Does that sound fair? Beatrice smiled, looking triumphant. That is the first sensible thing you have said all evening. See, Tyler, she is finally learning her place. Tyler snatched the keys off the plate, slipping them into his pocket with a smug grin. It is about time. The free ride is over, Simone. I picked up my empty wine glass, looking at his arrogant, clueless face. Oh, the ride is definitely over, Tyler, I said, turning to walk out of the dining room. I hope you saved up for the gas. I left them sitting in the dining room with their half-eaten prime rib and their delusions of grandeur. As I walked up the sweeping mahogany staircase, I could hear Beatrice downstairs laughing loudly, praising Tyler for finally putting me in my place. Let them laugh. I walked straight into the master suite, closed the solid oak door, and went to work. I opened the hidden wall safe behind my vanity and pulled out the heavy fireproof folder holding the real truth about this house. It was the truth Beatrice fiercely refused to see. Jamal was a charismatic, brilliant, and loving husband, but his financial literacy was virtually non-existent. When he was alive, he could never say no to his mother. He secretly took out high-interest personal loans to pay off Beatrice's reckless shopping habits. He funded Chloe's luxury vacations because Beatrice convinced him it was his duty as the successful older brother to take care of his sister. When he died suddenly 2 years ago, the bank was already preparing foreclosure documents. His life insurance did not even cover his secret debts. I paid for his funeral out of my own pocket. I paid off the massive arrears on the mortgage using my annual corporate bonus. I spent the last 2 years working 80-hour weeks at my wealth management firm just to keep a roof over my head, all while Beatrice strutted around our community, telling her country club friends that her son had left behind a vast fortune. I spread the thick stack of receipts across my California king bed. Every piece of custom furniture, every high-end appliance, every crystal chandelier, it was all purchased using my primary corporate credit card, long after Jamal passed away. When I told Tyler I would leave exactly what Jamal paid for, I meant it literally. Jamal bought a house with contractor-grade carpets, cheap laminate countertops, and basic lighting. That is exactly what I was going to leave them. At exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, the heavy rumble of commercial moving trucks shook the driveway. I had already been awake since 4, packing my personal documents, expensive jewelry, and designer clothes. A crew of 8 men wearing Apex Premium moving uniforms stepped out. The foreman, a burly man named Jackson, walked up to the front door holding a digital tablet. I had hired their premium teardown service, a package usually reserved for corporate office relocations and aggressive asset liquidations. "Good morning, Miss Simone," Jackson said, taking off his cap. "We have the whole day blocked out for you in a fleet of 3 trucks. What exactly are we loading up?" I handed him my meticulous 40-page inventory list. "Everything, Jackson," I said flatly. "If it is on this list, it goes into the trucks. And I mean absolutely everything." Jackson read the first page and raised his eyebrows, but he did not ask questions. He signaled his team, and the great strip down began. It was a beautiful symphony of destruction and reclaiming my peace. I stood in the kitchen holding a cup of black coffee as 2 men carefully unbolted the massive custom Sub-Zero refrigerator and the 8-burner Wolf range I had imported from Germany. They hauled them out the front door on heavy-duty dollies. Another team was in the living room, meticulously dismantling the 80-inch OLED smart television and ripping out the expensive surround sound system I had professionally installed into the ceiling. I walked into the grand foyer and pointed up at the ceiling. "I need that chandelier down, gentlemen," I called out. It took 3 men and a massive automated ladder to unhook the imported Italian crystal chandelier from the 20-foot ceiling. They boxed it up in custom foam and replaced it with a single bare 60-watt bulb that cast a pathetic, harsh shadow against the walls. With every piece of furniture that left the house, a heavy weight lifted off my chest. For 2 years, I had preserved this home like a museum to a man who loved me, but left me with a financial disaster. I kept quiet to protect his dignity and to spare his mother the excruciating pain of knowing her golden boy was broke. My reward for that exhausting grace was an eviction notice served on a Sunday afternoon. Well, the grace period was officially over. Upstairs, the crew was dismantling the custom California closets. I had paid $30,000 to have them built into the master suite, so I could properly store my work wardrobe. The men unbolted the cedar planks, removed the velvet-lined jewelry drawers, and left nothing but bare drywall and empty nail holes. They took the automated blackout blinds off the bedroom windows. They even uninstalled the expensive smart thermostats from the walls, leaving the exposed wires capped off with bright orange plastic tips. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the luxurious $2 million estate had been completely hollowed out. I walked through the echoing, empty rooms. My footsteps sounded loud and hollow against the bare hardwood floors. The house looked exactly the way it did the day Jamal bought it. Cold, empty, and devoid of any warmth, character, or luxury. The gourmet kitchen was just a series of gaping, dusty holes where the expensive appliances used to be. The grand living room was a vast expanse of nothingness. I left one single item in the center of the massive dining room. It was a cheap plastic folding chair I had bought from a local hardware store for $10. I placed the original builder-grade spare keys on the seat of the chair, right next to a freshly printed copy of the 30-day eviction notice Beatrice had served me the day before. Jackson handed me the final manifest to sign. "The trucks are loaded and headed to your climate-controlled storage units, Miss Simone," he said, looking around the barren room. "Are you sure you do not want us to take that folding chair too?" I smiled warmly and handed the digital tablet back to him. "No, Jackson," I replied. "I am leaving that as a housewarming gift for the new tenants. They are going to need somewhere to sit and think about their life choices." I locked the heavy front door for the last time, stepped into my waiting black car, and drove away to my luxury corporate apartment downtown without shedding a single tear. I felt incredibly light, as if I had just shed a skin that no longer fit me. Tomorrow was Tuesday, the exact day Tyler and Chloe had proudly announced they would be arriving to move their things into the master suite. They were entirely expecting a fully furnished, professionally decorated mansion, ready for them to play house without lifting a finger. I could only imagine the look on Tyler's arrogant, entitled face when he unlocked that front door and walked into an echoing cavern of bare drywall, cheap light bulbs, and exposed wires. But the stark, empty house was only the beginning of my lesson. Tyler, Chloe, and Beatrice had absolutely no idea about the massive financial landmine I had deliberately left ticking in the mailbox. They wanted the legacy so badly, and now they were about to choke on it. Sitting alone in my quiet corporate apartment that Monday evening, the adrenaline of the day finally evaporated, leaving behind a heavy, hollow ache in my chest. I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the edge of the sofa, looking down at the thick 40-page inventory manifest resting on the coffee table. My mind involuntarily pulled me back to the grueling events of the afternoon. Overseeing the movers had taken a much deeper emotional toll than I had anticipated. It was not just about packing up my property or exacting petty revenge. It was about meticulously dismantling the beautiful, functional illusion I had spent years building to protect a man I deeply loved. I closed my eyes and remembered standing in the main hallway, watching one of the technicians carefully extract the central hub of the custom smart home security system from the wall. I had paid $15,000 for that system shortly after we got married. I did not buy it for the luxury or the convenience. I bought it because after Jamal's early business ventures started failing, the mounting stress made him absent-minded. He would forget to lock the deadbolts or leave the garage door wide open overnight. I needed us to feel safe, but I never told him the real reason I had it installed. I just told him it was a modern upgrade for our modern life. In the formal living room, I had run my hand over the smooth, rich grain of the imported hardwood console table one last time before the moving crew wrapped it in thick protective blankets. My heart had twisted with a complicated grief. I purchased that table, along with the matching custom sectionals and the imported rugs, using my first major corporate bonus after being promoted to senior wealth management advisor at my firm. Jamal had been so incredibly proud that day. We hosted his mother and sister for a lavish dinner, and Jamal let Beatrice go on and on about how successful his investments must be to afford such exquisite taste. Jamal was a wonderful, vibrant man who could easily light up any room with his warm smile and his natural charisma. He was affectionate and supportive of my career, but his own financial reality was a rapidly sinking ship. He simply did not understand money, and he was terrified of disappointing his demanding mother. So, I quietly took over. I paid off his mounting credit card debts, his failed speculative investments, and the secret personal loans he took out to buy Beatrice expensive birthday gifts. I funded our luxurious lifestyle entirely on my own. I buried my own financial achievements and let him take the credit. Also, his fragile pride could remain intact under the crushing weight of Beatrice's relentless expectations. Watching the high-end kitchen appliances being unbolted and wheeled away on heavy-duty dollies felt like tearing the absolute heart out of the home. The gleaming double ovens, the custom-built wine fridge, and the commercial-grade espresso machine were symbols of the life I thought we were building together. I loved cooking Sunday dinners in that kitchen. I loved hosting our friends. But the painful truth was that every time I swiped my corporate card to upgrade that house, I was just putting expensive bandages on a massive financial hemorrhage. Beatrice never knew that her son's supposed wealth was built entirely on my 80-hour work weeks and my relentless corporate grinding. She just saw the shiny surfaces and assumed it was her family's divine birthright. By the time the final Apex moving truck had pulled out of the driveway yesterday, the beautiful illusion was completely gone. I had stood in the center of the foyer, looking around at what was actually left. Without my financial contributions, the house was nothing but a cold, echoing shell. It was stripped down to the bare drywall, the exposed wiring, and the cheap contractor-grade lighting that flickered unreliably overhead. The house was finally honest. It reflected the exact reality of Jamal's estate. Empty. The harsh sunlight of Tuesday morning woke me up in my new apartment. Today was the day. Tyler and Chloe had proudly announced they would be arriving at the house at 10 o'clock in the morning to move their things into the master suite. They were undoubtedly expecting a fully furnished, professionally decorated mansion, ready for them to play house without lifting a single finger. At exactly 10:15, my cell phone began to ring. The caller ID flashed with Beatrice's name. I let it ring 3 times, taking a slow, deep breath to center myself. I tapped the green answer button and brought the phone to my ear, not saying a word. Simone? What in the world have you done? Beatrice shrieked through the speaker. Her voice was trembling with a mixture of shock and absolute rage. The sound of her panic echoed perfectly in the background, telling me she was standing right in the middle of that empty living room with Tyler and Chloe. I am not sure what you mean, Beatrice, I replied, my voice perfectly level and calm. I followed your instructions to the letter. I vacated the premises within your ridiculous timeline. Do not play games with me, Beatrice screamed. The house is entirely empty. You stripped it bare. You took the refrigerator. You took the chandeliers. You even took the security cameras off the porch. You are a common thief, Simone. I am calling the police right now to report you for grand larceny and theft of family property. I opened my laptop, navigating to my email outbox. I think you should hold off on dialing 911, Beatrice, I said smoothly. I just sent an email to your phone, as well as to Chloe and Tyler. It is an indexed, fully authenticated document containing the purchase receipts, credit card statements, and delivery manifests for every single item that was removed from that house yesterday. You will notice that every single receipt matches the name and the account number of my corporate credit card. There was a heavy, stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Tyler in the background, yelling something about the lack of air conditioning. As I told Tyler at dinner on Sunday, I continued, my tone dropping to a cold, authoritative register. I left exactly what Jamal paid for: the empty rooms, the contractor-grade lighting, and the bare drywall. That is the family legacy you were so desperate to reclaim. I hope Chloe and Tyler enjoy starting their traditional family on the bare floorboards. You cannot do this. Simone. Beatrice stammered, her voice losing its venom and replacing it with pure panic. This is my son's house. You cannot just leave my daughter with nothing. It is not my job to provide for your grown daughter and her husband, I said. You wanted me gone. I am gone. The house is all yours. Before she could utter another word, I heard a loud scuffling sound, and Tyler's angry voice came through the speaker. Listen to me, you bitter, greedy woman, Tyler barked into the phone. You are going to return my wife's property immediately. If those trucks are not back in this driveway by noon, I am coming down to your fancy downtown office, and I will make such a scene that your partners will have no choice but to fire you. I smiled, leaning back in my chair. Is that a threat, Tyler? It is a promise, Tyler spat. You have 3 hours, Simone. I highly suggest you do not waste your gas coming downtown, Tyler, I replied softly. But if you feel like embarrassing yourself today, the doors to my firm are wide open. Just make sure you bring your ID for the security desk. I hung up the phone and blocked his number. The trap was set. Tyler's arrogance was entirely predictable, and I knew he would not be able to resist trying to intimidate me in front of my colleagues. He thought his privilege and his loud voice would force me into submission. He had no idea what was waiting for him. I did not have to wait long. Less than 45 minutes after I disconnected the call, the polished tranquility of my wealth management firm was abruptly shattered. My office is located on the 40th floor of a premium downtown high-rise. It is a space designed to project quiet power, featuring floor-to-ceiling glass walls, imported marble reception desks, and an atmosphere of hushed, respectful professionalism. It is not the kind of place where people raise their voices. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing a quarterly investment portfolio for a client, when my desk phone flashed. It was Sarah, our front desk receptionist. Before she could even get a full sentence out to warn me, the heavy glass doors to the main executive suite swung open violently. Tyler marched into the office, his face flushed an angry, blotchy red. He was completely ignoring the security protocols and brushing past a very alarmed Sarah. He looked completely out of place in his wrinkled polo shirt and cargo shorts, standing in the middle of a firm where bespoke suits were the minimum requirement. He had clearly driven straight from the empty house, fueled by pure adrenaline and blind entitlement. He spotted me through the glass walls of my corner office and made a beeline for my door, throwing it open without knocking. "You think you are so smart, Simone," he yelled, his voice echoing out into the quiet bullpen where my colleagues were now openly staring. "You think you can just gut a $2 million house and get away with it? I am giving you one last chance to turn those moving trucks around before I call my lawyer and have you arrested for grand larceny." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply closed my laptop, folded my hands on top of my desk, and looked at him. I let the silence stretch for several long seconds, forcing him to stand there awkwardly in the quiet room. The more composed I remained, the more unhinged he appeared. "You do not have a lawyer, Tyler," I said smoothly, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. "And even if you did, any competent attorney would take one look at the indexed receipt file I emailed you and laugh you out of their office. I am a senior wealth management advisor. I handle complex assets, liabilities, and legal documentation for a living. Do you honestly believe I would remove a single coaster from that house without a bulletproof legal right to do so?" He planted his hands heavily on my desk, leaning over to try and use his physical height to intimidate me. It was a classic bully tactic, one he was entirely used to getting away with. He expected me to shrink back, to be embarrassed by the public scene he was causing in my workplace. He expected me to cave under the pressure of his unwarranted authority. "Jamal bought that furniture," Tyler growled, his breath coming in heavy pants. "It belongs to the estate. It belongs to Chloe." "Jamal did not buy anything," I replied, my voice dropping to a sharp, icy whisper. "Jamal had terrible credit, and even worse, spending habits. I bought the custom sectionals. I bought the imported chandeliers. I bought the commercial-grade kitchen appliances with my annual corporate bonuses. My name is on every single invoice, which you would know if you bothered to read the PDF I sent, instead of throwing a tantrum like a spoiled child." Tyler faltered for a second, his eyes darting around the room as the reality of my words began to pierce through his arrogance. But his pride would not let him back down. He stood up straight and crossed his arms over his chest. "Fine," he spat. "Keep the stupid furniture. We will just buy new things. Better things. We do not need your hand-me-downs anyway, but you are still going to pay for the damages your movers caused to the drywall when they took the security system out." I smiled warmly. "Actually, the walls are entirely intact. Apex Premium Moving is fully bonded and insured. They specialize in clean extractions. But I am so glad you mentioned your plans to buy new things. You are going to need that budget very soon." I reached into the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. I slid it across the sleek glass surface until it stopped right in front of him. Tyler looked at the envelope suspiciously. "What is this?" he asked, his tone guarded. "Consider it a housewarming gift," I said, leaning back in my leather ergonomic chair. "Go ahead. Open it." He snatched the envelope off the desk and tore the top flap open. He pulled out a stack of stamped official-looking documents. I watched his eyes scan the first page. For a moment, he looked genuinely confused. Then, as his brain processed the bold black text at the top of the paper, the remaining color completely drained from his face. "These are utility cancellation confirmations," he whispered, sounding as though all the air had been punched out of his lungs. "That is correct," I said cheerfully. "As of 8 o'clock this morning, I am no longer legally or morally obligated to maintain the accounts for that property, seeing as it is now your primary residence. I formally transferred the liability. I canceled the electricity, the municipal water supply, the natural gas lines, the high-speed internet, and the private trash collection services." "You cut off the power," Tyler choked out, staring at the papers in disbelief. "I did not cut it off," I corrected him. "I simply removed my credit card from the autopay system." The local utility companies were very understanding. They informed me that since the house is over 6,000 square feet, the new occupants will need to undergo a credit check and put down a rather substantial security deposit to establish new service connections. "Given your current credit score, Tyler, I imagine that deposit will be quite steep." He crumpled the papers in his fist, his shock rapidly morphing back into explosive anger. You cannot do this to us, Simone. Chloe needs air conditioning. We have groceries coming this afternoon. Well, considering you do not have a refrigerator anymore, I suggest you buy non-perishables, I replied flatly. And I would hurry if I were you. According to the disconnection schedule on page 3 of that packet, the grid will be completely shut off in exactly 2 hours. You arrogant, vindictive, Tyler started to yell, taking a threatening step around the side of my desk. Before he could finish his insult, the heavy wooden door of my office swung open wide. Marcus, the head of building security, stepped inside. Marcus is a former Marine, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall, and he does not tolerate disruptions in our building. 2 additional security guards stood right behind him in the hallway. Is there a problem here, Miss Simone? Marcus asked, his deep voice rumbling through the room. His eyes were locked dead onto Tyler. No problem, Marcus, I said, offering a polite smile. This gentleman was just leaving. He is a trespasser, and he seems to have lost his way to the elevators. Tyler threw his hands up defensively, taking a quick step back away from my desk. This is a family dispute, he told Marcus, trying to sound authoritative, but failing miserably. You do not need to get involved. Marcus stepped fully into the office, his presence immediately dominating the space. Sir, you need to exit the building right now, or I will have you physically removed and arrested for trespassing. Make your choice. Tyler looked at Marcus, then looked back at me. The bravado was entirely gone, replaced by the bitter, stinging humiliation of total defeat. He realized he had absolutely zero power in this room. He was outclassed, outsmarted, and completely exposed. You are going to regret this, Simone, Tyler hissed venomously, pointing a shaking finger at me. My mother-in-law is not going to let you get away with treating her family like this. Tell Beatrice I said hello, I replied effortlessly, turning my attention back to my laptop screen. Marcus placed a heavy hand on Tyler's shoulder and forcibly guided him out of my office. I watched through the glass walls as the 3 security guards escorted him through the bullpen. My colleagues watched in absolute silence as Tyler was marched toward the exit. His head hung low in disgrace. He looked small, pathetic, and entirely beaten. I took a deep, cleansing breath as the heavy glass doors closed behind him. The office quickly returned to its quiet, professional rhythm. I opened my client portfolio and went right back to work, feeling an incredible sense of peace wash over me. Tyler and Chloe were currently sitting in an empty, echoing house with no furniture, no appliances, and a ticking clock on their basic utilities. They were about to learn how incredibly expensive it is to maintain the illusion of wealth. But the real devastation had not even begun yet. The stripped house and the utility blackout were just the prelude. The first of the month was rapidly approaching, and with it, the massive financial reality check that would shatter Beatrice's entire world. I smiled as the heavy stainless steel elevator doors closed on his red, furious face. By the way, Tyler, I called out just before the narrow gap sealed completely. I canceled the accounts yesterday. You have about 3 hours before the water and power are completely shut off. The satisfaction of that moment carried me through the rest of the week. I settled into my luxury downtown apartment, enjoying the quiet peace of my new life. I did not have to worry about cleaning up after entitled in-laws or pretending to be a subservient widow to protect a fragile legacy. I was finally free. But for Tyler and Chloe, the nightmare was just beginning. I found out later exactly how the next 2 weeks played out for my ungrateful sister-in-law and her arrogant husband. Tyler had raced back to the estate that afternoon, desperately trying to get the utility companies on the phone. But just as I had warned him, establishing new service for a 6,000-square-foot property required a thorough credit check. Tyler had a history of missed car payments and maxed-out credit cards. The municipal power company demanded a massive $3,000 security deposit up front, payable only in certified funds. Tyler had to completely drain their meager savings account just to keep the lights on and the water running. They spent their first 2 weeks living in a completely barren house. Because they had no money left to buy actual furniture, they were forced to sleep on a cheap inflatable air mattress in the middle of the sprawling master suite. Without my imported rugs and heavy custom drapes to absorb the sound, every single footstep and spoken word echoed loudly against the bare drywall. To make matters worse, they quickly realized that running the central air conditioning for a house of that size was going to cost them hundreds of dollars a week. Tyler forced Chloe to keep the thermostat turned off. My pampered sister-in-law, who was used to living in absolute luxury on my dime, spent her days sweating in an empty, echoing shell of a house, eating fast food because she had no refrigerator to store groceries. But the stark emptiness of the house and the suffocating heat were nothing compared to the financial bomb that was waiting to drop. The first of the month arrived with a heavy, humid stillness. Tyler walked down the long, sweeping driveway to check the mail before heading to his mediocre middle management job. He was already stressed, wearing a wrinkled dress shirt, because they still had not purchased an ironing board. He opened the ornate brick mailbox and pulled out a stack of envelopes. Among the junk mail and local flyers was a thick, crisp envelope bearing the official logo of Premier National Bank. It was addressed to the estate of Jamal Thomas. Assuming it was simply a routine tax document or a final bank statement confirming the vast wealth he believed he had married into, Tyler ripped the envelope open right there in the driveway. He pulled out the single sheet of premium paper and scanned the bold black text at the top of the page. He stopped walking. His heart dropped violently into his stomach. It was a statement for the primary mortgage. Tyler blinked, shaking his head, convinced he was misreading the numbers. But the stark reality remained printed right in front of him. The total remaining principal balance on the property was $1.2 million. And right below that, printed in a large, demanding font, was the amount due for the current month, exactly $5,000, payable immediately. Tyler stumbled backward, leaning against the brick mailbox for physical support. $5,000. It was more than his entire monthly take-home pay. It was an impossible sum. Beatrice had sworn up and down that the house was fully paid off. She had told Tyler and Chloe that Jamal bought the estate in cash, leaving it as a permanent, debt-free legacy for the family. Tyler had confidently canceled the lease on his apartment and blown his savings on the utility deposits based on that exact promise. He turned and sprinted back up the driveway, bursting through the front door of the empty house. Chloe was sitting on the floor in the living room, complaining loudly about her back hurting from the air mattress. "Look at this," Tyler screamed, throwing the bank statement down on the hardwood floor in front of her. "Look at what your mother got us into." Chloe picked up the paper, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What is a mortgage statement?" she asked, her voice tight with rising panic. "Mom said Jamal owned the house. Mom said Simone was just living here for free." "Your mother is a liar," Tyler roared, pacing back and forth across the empty room, his footsteps echoing wildly. "Your brother did not own anything. This house is drowning in debt. We owe $5,000 in 2 days, Chloe. I do not even have $500 in my checking account. We are going to be living on the street." Chloe burst into tears, entirely unequipped to handle a real crisis. She fumbled for her phone and dialed her mother with shaking hands. Beatrice answered on the second ring, her voice cheerful and completely oblivious to the impending disaster. "Good morning, my darling," Beatrice sang through the speaker. "How are you and Tyler enjoying your new family estate today?" "Mom, what did you do?" Chloe sobbed hysterically. "Tyler just opened a bill from the bank. The house is not paid off. The bank wants $5,000 by Friday. Tyler says we are going to lose everything." There was a sharp gasp on the other end of the line. "Give the phone to Tyler right now," Beatrice demanded, her cheerful tone instantly vanishing into a sharp, authoritative bark. Tyler snatched the phone from his wife. "You lied to me, Beatrice," he yelled, completely abandoning any pretense of respect. "You told me this place was a free ride. You made me break my apartment lease for a massive mountain of debt. Do not you dare raise your voice to me, Tyler, Beatrice snapped fiercely. There is obviously a massive mistake. My son was a highly successful businessman. He paid cash for that property. I saw the original deed with my own two eyes. That vicious, greedy widow Simone is probably behind this. She is likely trying to run some kind of elaborate scam to scare you out of the house so she can steal it back. It is an official bank document. Beatrice Tyler fired back, his face red with panic and rage. It has the account numbers and the federal routing codes. This is not a scam. This is a $1.2 million loan that you pushed onto me. Calm down immediately, Beatrice ordered, her fierce maternal pride blinding her to the absolute truth. I am not going to let some clerical error or some vindictive trick from Simone ruin my family. I am going to march down to Premier National Bank this morning and speak directly to the branch manager. I will have this ridiculous, insulting mistake cleared up by noon. Do not panic. I will handle this. Beatrice hung up the phone, her hands shaking with indignation. She marched into her closet and pulled out her finest Sunday suit and a matching wide-brimmed hat. She adorned herself in heavy gold jewelry, determined to project the image of a wealthy, untouchable matriarch. She was entirely convinced that she could simply demand respect and bully the banking system into submission. She had no idea that she was walking directly into a public humiliation so severe it would permanently shatter the entire foundation of her fabricated reality. Beatrice drove her pristine luxury sedan, a vehicle secretly paid for by Jamal's hidden personal loans, right into the reserved parking spot at Premier National Bank. She walked through the heavy glass doors like she owned the entire building. She completely ignored the velvet ropes and the long line of everyday customers waiting for tellers. Instead, she marched directly across the marble floor to the polished desk of the branch manager, a meticulous man named Mr. Sterling. She slammed the crumpled mortgage statement onto his keyboard, nearly knocking over his coffee mug. I demand you fix this insulting clerical error immediately, she barked, her voice echoing loudly off the high ceilings. My son Jamal Thomas was a highly successful entrepreneur. He purchased his family estate entirely in cash. I will not have your incompetent staff harassing my daughter with fake bills. Mr. Sterling adjusted his glasses, completely unbothered by her aggressive tone. He calmly picked up the statement and typed the account number into his terminal. He looked at his computer screen, then looked back at Beatrice with a mixture of professional patience and deep pity. There is no mistake, Mrs. Thomas, he said clearly, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet bank lobby. This is a legitimate and active mortgage statement. In fact, this account has been dangerously close to default several times over the last 2 years. Beatrice let out a loud, mocking laugh. That is utterly ridiculous, she proclaimed, looking around at the other customers to gather an audience for her performance. My son was wealthy. He left a massive estate. You are clearly looking at the wrong file. I want you to pull the original deed right now. Mr. Sterling sighed and turned his large monitor around so the screen directly faced Beatrice. I am looking at the exact financial file for Jamal Thomas, he stated firmly. Your son did not pay cash. He took out a $1.2 million mortgage to purchase the property. Furthermore, he heavily borrowed against the remaining equity before his passing. He died with immense medical and personal debt. The only reason this house has not been seized by the bank is because his widow, Simone, has been voluntarily making the $5,000 monthly payments out of her own personal corporate account. Beatrice stared at the glowing screen. She saw my name clearly printed on the transaction history. She saw the long, undeniable ledger of $5,000 transfers originating from my wealth management firm. Her knees went weak. The heavy gold jewelry she wore suddenly felt like a chain tightening around her neck. The bank lobby was dead silent, save for the soft whispers of the other customers who had heard every single word of her public humiliation. She had spent the last 2 years bragging to everyone in our affluent community about her son's vast fortune. Now, standing in the middle of the bank, The truth was laid bare for everyone to see. Her golden boy was broke. And the daughter-in-law she had just violently kicked out of the family was the only reason they were not all living on the street. Beatrice stumbled out of the bank, her proud posture completely broken. The drive back to the estate felt like a blur. When she walked through the front door of the sweltering, empty house, she did not look like a triumphant matriarch. She looked like a ghost. Tyler and Chloe were pacing the bare floorboards of the living room, desperately waiting for her to fix the problem. "Did you get it handled?" Tyler demanded, rushing up to her. "Tell me you got the bill canceled and fired whatever idiot sent it." Beatrice shook her head slowly, unable to look him in the eye. "The bill is real," she whispered. "Jamal did not own the house. Simone has been paying the mortgage out of her own pocket this entire time." Tyler's face contorted in sheer panic. He backed away from her as if she had a contagious disease. "What do you mean she has been paying it?" he screamed, grabbing his sparse hair. "You told us it was a free house, Beatrice. You promised us a free ride. We owe $5,000 in 48 hours. I do not have that kind of money. My credit cards are entirely maxed out. My car lease is past due." Chloe looked at her husband in absolute horror. "What do you mean your credit cards are maxed out?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Tyler, you told me your new promotion at work comfortably covered our lifestyle." Tyler waved her off aggressively, his carefully crafted illusion of success shattering under the pressure. "I lied, Chloe," he snapped brutally. "I work middle management. I barely clear $4,000 a month after taxes. I only agreed to move in here because I thought we were getting a fully paid-off mansion. We need cash right now. We need to take out a payday loan or maybe a high-interest title loan against your mother's car just to keep the bank away." Beatrice watched her daughter's marriage begin to fracture right in front of her eyes. She realized the absolute catastrophic mistake she had made. She had let her blind arrogance push her to evict the one person holding their entire fragile universe together. She knew Tyler was financially illiterate and completely useless in a crisis. If she did not fix this immediately, her daughter would be homeless, and her own reputation in their social circles would be utterly destroyed. "I will handle this," Beatrice said, her voice shaking but desperate. "I will call Simone. I will invite her to a nice lunch." She loved Jamal deeply. She is just acting out right now because she is grieving and feels abandoned. "I will talk some sense into her and convince her to come back and resume the payments for the sake of the family legacy." Tyler scoffed loudly. "You really think she is just going to open her wallet after you served her an eviction notice and tried to steal her furniture?" "She does not have a choice," Beatrice insisted, desperately trying to rebuild her shattered delusion of control. "She owes this family. She will do what I tell her to do." Later that afternoon, I was sitting in my corner office when my phone screen lit up with a text message from Beatrice. The tone was sickeningly sweet, a complete 180-degree turn from the venom she had spewed at me just days prior. "My dearest Simone," she wrote, "I fear we have had a terrible misunderstanding. Family is so important, and Jamal would want us to stick together. Please let me treat you to a healing lunch tomorrow at the downtown bistro, so we can clear the air." I read the message and actually laughed out loud. She thought she could simply buy me a salad, gaslight me into feeling guilty, and force me to resume my role as their secret ATM. She had no idea that I was going to accept her invitation, but I was definitely not going to save her. I was going to let her dig her own grave, and then I was going to leave her with the bill. I arrived at the upscale downtown bistro exactly at noon the following day. The restaurant was bustling with the city's corporate elite, a far cry from the suburban country clubs Beatrice was used to dominating. I found her sitting at a corner booth. She looked completely different from the arrogant matriarch who had slid an eviction notice across my table just a few days ago. The heavy gold jewelry was gone. Her posture was slumped, and the dark circles under her eyes told me she had not slept a wink since her disastrous reality check. She tried to muster a warm, motherly smile as I slid into the booth across from her, but it looked brittle, like it might shatter at any moment. "Simone," she said softly, reaching across the table to pat my hand. I immediately pulled my hand back and placed it gracefully in my lap. "Let us skip the pleasantries, Beatrice," I said, my voice crisp and professional, "and you texted me because you wanted to clear the air. So go ahead, clear it." She withdrew her hand, looking momentarily stung before launching into her rehearsed speech. She looked down at her water glass, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "I went to the bank yesterday, Simone. I spoke with Mr. Sterling. He told me everything. He told me about Jamal's debts. He told me about the loans, the medical bills, and the mortgage. He humiliated me in front of half the neighborhood. Everyone in that lobby heard that my son died penniless." I looked at her without a single ounce of pity. "Mr. Sterling did not humiliate you, Beatrice. Your own blind arrogance humiliated you. You walked in there demanding respect for a fantasy you fabricated out of thin air. I spent 2 years working myself to the bone to protect that exact fantasy because I loved your son. I paid $5,000 a month to keep a roof over your head and a smile on your face. And how did you repay me? You kicked me out of my own home so your spoiled daughter and her lazy husband could play house." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, but I knew they were tears of self-pity, not remorse. "I did not know, Simone," she pleaded, her voice rising slightly. "I swear to you I had no idea. Jamal told me he bought the house in cash. He told me his investments were thriving. I thought you were just hoarding his wealth. You have to believe me." "I believe that you only see what you want to see," I replied calmly, waving over the waiter. The waiter, a polite young man in a crisp white apron, handed us the leather-bound menus. I ordered a sparkling water and the seared ahi tuna salad. Beatrice nervously ordered a glass of the most expensive Chardonnay on the menu and the filet mignon. Old habits die hard, even when you are staring down the barrel of bankruptcy. When the waiter left, Beatrice leaned in closer, dropping the fragile motherly facade entirely. "We are in desperate trouble, Simone," she whispered, her voice cracking with raw panic. "Tyler does not make anywhere near enough money to cover the $5,000 mortgage. He lied to Chloe about his salary. He maxed out all of his credit cards just to turn the electricity back on yesterday. The bank is demanding the first payment by Friday. If they do not get it, they will start the foreclosure process. Chloe will be homeless. They will lose everything." I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. "That sounds like a very stressful situation for Tyler," I said neutrally. "He should probably start looking for a second job. I hear the overnight shift at the warehouse downtown pays time and a half." Beatrice gasped, completely appalled. "You cannot be serious. Tyler is a professional. He cannot work in a warehouse. This is family, Simone. You cannot just abandon us. You love Jamal. You know he would want you to take care of his sister. Please, just come back to the house. We will give you the guest room. You can resume the mortgage payments, and we can just go back to the way things were." I stared at her, genuinely amazed by the sheer depth of her audacity. "You want me to move into the tiny guest room of my own house, pay the $5,000 mortgage so your daughter can live in the master suite, and pretend none of this ever happened? It is the Christian thing to do," Beatrice pleaded, clutching her cloth napkin like a lifeline. "For Jamal's legacy. Jamal's legacy is a mountain of debt that I am no longer legally obligated to pay," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "I am not your secret ATM anymore, Beatrice. I am not going to fund Tyler's leased cars or Chloe's manicures. I gave you exactly what you asked for. I vacated the premises. The house is yours. The debt is yours. You wanted to be the matriarch of the grand family estate. Now you get to pay for it." The desperation in Beatrice's eyes instantly morphed back into the vicious, toxic anger I knew so well. Her face turned a mottled shade of red. "You selfish, greedy little woman," she hissed, abandoning the restaurant etiquette entirely. "You set us up. You knew we could not afford it, and you let us walk right into a trap." "You built the trap, Beatrice," I countered smoothly. "I just stopped throwing myself on top of it to protect you." The waiter returned, carrying our meals on a large silver tray. He carefully placed the beautiful ahi tuna salad in front of me and the heavy, expensive filet mignon in front of Beatrice. He topped off her wine glass and asked if we needed anything else. "Just the check, please," I said, pulling my corporate credit card from my designer wallet. "But please split it. I will only be paying for my sparkling water and my salad. The lady will be taking care of her own wine and steak." The waiter nodded politely, printed my small receipt, and handed Beatrice a separate leather folder containing her $80 lunch bill. Beatrice stared at the leather folder as if it were a venomous snake. She had not brought her purse. She fully expected me to pay, just like I always did. "You cannot leave me with this," she whispered furiously, looking around the elegant restaurant as the reality of her situation set in. "I do not have my cards." "Then I suggest you call Tyler to come bail you out," I said, signing my receipt and standing up from the booth. "Or maybe you can offer to wash the dishes. Consider this your first lesson in living within your actual means." I turned and walked out of the bistro, the satisfying click of my heels echoing on the polished hardwood floors. As I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the bright city sunlight, I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. I had finally severed the emotional cord. But Beatrice was not the type of woman to accept defeat gracefully. By the time I reached my office later that afternoon, she and Chloe had already launched the next phase of their desperate attack. If they could not manipulate me into paying their bills, they were going to try and destroy my reputation entirely. The smear campaign was about to begin. While I was walking back to my firm, enjoying the crisp city air and the profound lightness of my newfound freedom, a very different scene was unfolding across town. It did not take long for the details of that afternoon to make their way back to me. In our tight-knit community, people talk, and the walls of that empty, echoing estate were remarkably thin. Beatrice had been left sitting in the booth of that upscale downtown bistro in a state of sheer panic. She had no cash, no credit cards, and an $80 lunch bill sitting on the table like a ticking time bomb. With absolutely no other option, she was forced to make the deeply humiliating phone call to her son-in-law. Tyler had to leave his cubicle, drive all the way downtown in midday traffic, and walk into the elegant restaurant looking completely disheveled and furious. But the true embarrassment happened when Tyler confidently handed his credit card to the waiter, only for the machine to instantly decline the charge. He tried a second card. Declined again. In front of the sneering waitstaff and his horrified mother-in-law, Tyler had to download a predatory cash advance application on his cell phone right there in the lobby. He took out a high-interest microloan just to cover a steak and a glass of wine. That humiliating incident at the bistro was the absolute breaking point for Tyler and Chloe's marriage. By the time they all returned to the sprawling, empty estate, the fragile alliance between the three of them had completely fractured. The house was sweltering. The temporary deposit Tyler had scraped together for the utility company had bounced due to insufficient funds, and the power grid had been shut off yet again. They were standing in a $2 million home with no air conditioning, no furniture, and a $5,000 mortgage payment due in less than 24 hours. Chloe finally snapped. She had been raised by Beatrice to be a pampered princess, and her entire identity was wrapped up in the illusion of wealth and status. She turned on Tyler, her voice echoing harshly off the bare drywall. She demanded to know how he was going to fix this disaster. She screamed that he was supposed to be the man of the house, the traditional provider, and he needed to step up and fund the luxurious lifestyle he had promised her when they got married. Tyler's fragile ego shattered completely under her demands. For years, Tyler had coasted on the unearned confidence of a mediocre man who believed financial success was his inherent birthright. He had always operated under the quiet, arrogant assumption that he was naturally superior to me. He thought his privilege automatically made him the rightful head of the family estate. But laid bare in that empty room, his complete incompetence was glaringly obvious. His privilege was entirely neutralized by his sheer financial stupidity. He had no wealth, no strategy, and no capability to lead. The arrogant, smug man who had sat at my dining table and mocked my grief was entirely gone. In his place was a desperate, sweating coward. He paced the empty living room and began throwing out the most disastrous financial ideas imaginable. "We can fix this," he stammered, his eyes darting wildly. "I saw a commercial for a title loan company on the drive home. Beatrice, we can sign over the title to your luxury sedan. They will give us cash today. And there are payday lenders right outside the city limits. If we take out 3 or 4 of those cash advances, we can cover the mortgage for this month. Then we just pawn your diamond engagement ring, Chloe, to pay the massive interest fees next week." Chloe looked at him like he had completely lost his mind. "You want to pawn my wedding ring?" she shrieked, clutching her hand to her chest. "You want to take out loan shark loans with 400% interest rates just to pay a mortgage we clearly cannot afford. You are a complete failure, Tyler." Simone managed to pay this massive mortgage every single month without breaking a sweat, and you cannot even pay for a single lunch without downloading an app. That comparison was the ultimate, devastating blow to Tyler's pride. To be directly compared to the black woman he had just tried to evict, and to be found so spectacularly lacking, broke whatever was left of his composure. "You want to talk about failures?" Tyler roared back, pointing a shaking finger directly at Beatrice. "Your mother is the one who dragged us into this mess. She lied to us. She promised us a fully paid-off mansion. She is the reason we are sitting in the dark sweating to death." Beatrice stood in the corner, clutching her designer purse, watching her family tear each other apart like wild animals in a cage. The sweet manipulation she had tried to use on me at the bistro had been a complete and utter failure. She realized then that she had completely lost control of the narrative. Her beloved son's legacy was a lie, her daughter's marriage was collapsing in real time, and her own pristine reputation was hanging by a thread. She knew I was never going to come back willingly. She knew the days of me quietly opening my checkbook to save them from their own gross incompetence were over forever. But Beatrice was a woman who would rather destroy everything around her than admit she was wrong. "Stop it," Beatrice commanded, her voice cutting sharply through the oppressive heat of the room. "Screaming at each other is not going to put money in the bank. Simone thinks she has won. She thinks she can just abandon this family, humiliate us, and leave us to rot while she sits in her fancy corporate office counting her money." Beatrice's eyes narrowed, the desperation in her mind twisting into pure, calculated malice. "If Simone will not pay out of duty or obligation, we will make her pay out of public shame. We are going to drag her name through the mud until she begs us to take her money just to make the humiliation stop." The seed for their vicious social war was officially planted. They could not beat me financially, and they knew they could not outsmart me legally. So they decided to attack the one place they thought I was still vulnerable. They were about to launch a full-scale assault on my reputation within our affluent church community. But they were about to learn another very painful lesson about underestimating the woman they had foolishly cast out. Despite the absolute chaos unfolding behind the closed doors of that sweltering, empty estate, Beatrice decided she needed to try one last desperate, manipulative tactic. She knew that screaming at Tyler and Chloe in the dark was not going to magically produce $5,000 before Friday. So she swallowed whatever tiny shred of pride she had left and sent me a sickeningly sweet text message. She invited me to an exclusive high-end bistro downtown under the guise of family healing. I decided to accept the invitation, mostly out of morbid curiosity. I wanted to look her in the eye and watch her try to spin this massive disaster. The bistro she chose was a reservations-only establishment known for its imported wine list and exorbitant prices. It was the exact kind of place Beatrice loved to frequent when she was spending my money. When I arrived, she was already seated at a prime corner booth with a crisp white tablecloth. She had dressed meticulously in a tailored navy suit and draped herself in the heavy pearl necklace I had bought her for her 60th birthday. She was desperately trying to project the image of a wealthy, unbothered matriarch, but I could see the tight, anxious lines around her mouth and the slight tremor in her hands. "Simone," she said, her voice dripping with an artificial, honeyed warmth as I slid into the booth across from her. "Thank you so much for coming. We really need to clear the air." I did not return her smile. I simply folded my hands on the table and waited. The waiter appeared immediately, offering us the leather-bound menus. Beatrice did not even hesitate. Operating on the blind, arrogant assumption that I would be picking up the tab as usual, she ordered a dozen fresh oysters, a heavy dry-aged steak, and a glass of the most expensive Cabernet on the menu. When the waiter turned to me, I politely closed my menu and ordered a single glass of sparkling water with a twist of lemon. Beatrice shifted uncomfortably in her seat as the waiter walked away. "Simone, I want to apologize for how things escalated on Sunday," she began, leaning forward and lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "The entire situation was just a terrible miscommunication. You know how Tyler can be with his words, he is rough around the edges, but he means well. And Chloe is just so sensitive about wanting to start a family. We all thought you wanted to downsize. We thought the house was too big and lonely for you after Jamal passed. We were trying to help you move on." I stared at her, genuinely amazed by the sheer audacity of her gaslighting. "A legally drafted 30-day eviction notice is not a miscommunication, Beatrice," I said, my voice perfectly level. "You did not ask me if I wanted to downsize. You demanded I vacate my own home so your daughter could claim the master suite." Beatrice waved her hand dismissively, as if my very real eviction was just a silly misunderstanding between friends. "Water under the bridge," she insisted, forcing a tight smile. "The point is, we are family. And family sticks together. I know you are hurting. I know you miss Jamal. We all do." She paused, waiting for the mention of Jamal's name to soften me. When my expression did not change, she pressed on, deploying her ultimate emotional weapon. "Jamal would be absolutely heartbroken to see us fighting like this," Beatrice said, placing her hand dramatically over her heart. "He loved that house. He wanted it to be a permanent legacy for the Thomas family. I know he would want you to do the right thing and honor his memory. We want you to come back, Simone. You can move your things into the guest bedroom downstairs. We will be one big happy family under one roof. All you have to do is resume paying the mortgage, just like Jamal would have wanted." I looked at this woman, taking in the full measure of her delusion. She actually believed she could kick me out of my own home, offer me a tiny guest room as a consolation prize, and manipulate me into paying $5,000 a month to fund her daughter's luxurious lifestyle. She thought my love for her deceased son made me weak, compliant, and easy to control. I took a slow, calm sip of my sparkling water. "Let me make something perfectly clear, Beatrice," I said, my tone dropping to an icy, authoritative register. "I loved Jamal deeply. But Jamal's legacy was a mountain of secret debt that I spent 2 years cleaning up so you would not have to face the embarrassment of knowing your golden boy was broke. I kept a roof over your head out of the goodness of my heart. But my charity officially ended the second you handed me that eviction notice." Beatrice's fake smile vanished completely. The mask of the grieving mother slipped, revealing the furious, entitled woman underneath. "You owe this family, Simone," she hissed, her voice rising slightly. "You are his widow. It is your duty to protect his estate." "It is my duty to protect my own peace," I countered firmly, setting an absolute boundary. "I am a wealth management advisor. I do not invest in failing assets, and I certainly do not invest in toxic, ungrateful relatives. I am not your personal ATM. You wanted the family estate. You demanded the keys. Now you get to pay the bills." Before Beatrice could launch another manipulative attack, the waiter returned. He carried a small black leather folder and placed it gently in the center of the table. The total came to exactly $320. Beatrice did not even look at the folder. She simply stared at me, her eyes burning with expectation, waiting for me to pull out my corporate credit card and make her problems disappear. Instead, I opened my designer purse and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. I placed it on the table next to my water glass. "That covers my sparkling water and a generous tip for the waiter," I said, sliding out of the luxurious leather booth and standing up. "Enjoy your steak, Beatrice." Panic instantly flooded Beatrice's face. She looked wildly at the black folder, then back up at me. "You cannot leave me with this bill, Simone," she stammered, abandoning her sophisticated volume control. "I did not bring my credit cards. I do not have any cash on me." "Then I suggest you call Tyler to come bail you out," I replied smoothly, looking down at her with absolute indifference. "Or perhaps you can speak to the manager about washing dishes in the back. Consider this your first lesson in living within your actual means." I turned my back on her and began walking toward the front exit, the satisfying click of my heels echoing over the soft jazz playing in the background. The humiliation of being left at a high-end restaurant with no way to pay finally broke the last of Beatrice's manufactured composure. She stood up from the booth, her face flushed a dark, angry red, and completely lost her mind right in the middle of the crowded dining room. "If you won't pay for your husband's home, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of greedy, heartless widow you really are," Beatrice yelled after me, her shrill voice slicing through the quiet elegance of the bistro. Diners turned their heads in shock, forks pausing halfway to their mouths. I did not stop walking. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the bright city sunlight, leaving her screaming behind me. Let her yell, let her make her empty threats. I knew exactly what she was going to do next, and I was entirely prepared to dismantle her incoming smear campaign piece by piece. True to her word, Beatrice did not waste a single second executing her threat. By the time Sunday morning rolled around, the social landscape of my life had been entirely terraformed by her vicious lies. Our family attended Greater Hope Fellowship, an affluent, predominantly black megachurch nestled in the upscale suburbs. It was the kind of congregation where Sunday service was as much a fashion show and a high-stakes networking event as it was a place of worship. The sprawling parking lot was always filled with luxury vehicles, and the massive sanctuary was a sea of custom-tailored suits, extravagant hats, and unspoken social hierarchies. Beatrice had been a cornerstone of the church community for over a decade. She wielded her influence in those pews like a seasoned politician, and now she was using all of her carefully curated political capital to completely destroy my reputation. When I pulled into the church parking lot that Sunday, the shift in the atmosphere was immediate and suffocating. Usually, my walk from the car to the sanctuary was filled with warm hugs, bright smiles, and familiar conversations. I had been a dedicated member of this congregation for years. I tithed generously, I volunteered for the youth mentoring programs, and I had always carried myself with dignity. But today, the air was ice cold. As I approached the grand glass doors of the lobby, groups of women who had known me for years suddenly stopped talking. They averted their eyes, whispered behind their programs, or turned their backs completely as I passed by. I walked into the sanctuary, my head held high, and took my usual seat near the middle aisle. 2 rows ahead of me, Beatrice and Chloe were already putting on the performance of a lifetime. Beatrice was dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, looking frail and heartbroken, while several prominent church members leaned over the pews to comfort her. Chloe was sitting beside her, looking equally distressed, accepting sympathetic pats on the shoulder and offering brave, trembling smiles. They were playing the roles of the devastated, discarded family to absolute perfection. After the service concluded, I stood up to make my way toward the exit. The congregation was mingling in the wide, brightly lit aisles, but an invisible 10-foot radius seemed to have formed around me. Nobody stepped into my space. Nobody offered a standard Sunday greeting. It was the silent, brutal excommunication that high society church communities excel at implementing. Just as I reached the heavy mahogany doors of the sanctuary, a firm hand clamped down on my shoulder. I turned around to find Sister Evelyn blocking my path. Sister Evelyn was the wife of the head elder. She was a woman in her late 60s who considered herself the ultimate moral authority of the congregation, a woman who enforced the unwritten rules of our culture with an iron fist. Her face was set in a tight, disapproving scowl. "Simone," she said, her voice dripping with condescension masked as righteous concern. "We need to have a word. Step into the fellowship hall with me." I followed her into the quiet, carpeted room off the main lobby. She crossed her arms, her eyes sweeping over my tailored dress as if searching for physical evidence of my alleged sins. I have to tell you, Simone, the elders and I are deeply troubled by what we are hearing. Sister Evelyn began, her tone lecturing and severe. Beatrice has been weeping in the prayer room all morning. She told us that since Jamal passed, you have completely lost your way. She told us you legally locked her out of her son's trust fund, evicted her pregnant daughter from the family estate, and stole all the furniture out of pure, vindictive spite. She said you left them sitting in an empty, sweltering house with no electricity while you parade around downtown in a luxury apartment, living off Jamal's hard-earned money. I looked at Sister Evelyn, feeling a mixture of profound disgust and sheer exhaustion. The toxic pressure to maintain appearances in this community was so deeply entrenched that nobody even bothered to ask for my side of the story. They simply took the word of the older matriarch as gospel truth because questioning the elders was considered highly disrespectful. Sister Evelyn, I said calmly, keeping my voice entirely respectful but firm. With all due respect, Beatrice is not telling you the truth. Jamal did not have a trust fund. He had crippling debt. I paid the mortgage on that house for 2 years out of my own pocket. I left because Beatrice served me with a 30-day eviction notice. She wanted the house. I simply gave it to her. Sister Evelyn waved her hand dismissively, completely uninterested in the factual reality of the situation. It does not matter who signed what piece of paper, Simone. You are a young woman, and Beatrice is your elder. It is a woman's duty to respect her elders and preserve the family legacy. Jamal was a good, successful man. He provided a beautiful life for you. How dare you tarnish his memory by abandoning his mother in her time of need? You are wealthy. You work at a high-powered firm. You should be taking care of that family, not hoarding your money like a greedy, selfish gold digger. Your behavior is a disgrace to this church and a disgrace to our community. The sheer audacity of her lecture hung heavily in the air. This was the dark underbelly of our culture, the intense, unyielding pressure to protect the image of the successful black family, even if it meant quietly crushing the women who were secretly holding it all together. Sister Evelyn did not care that I was being financially bled dry. She did not care that I had been disrespected and thrown out of my own home. She only cared that the pristine facade of Jamal's wealth had been cracked, and she expected me to fall on my sword to fix it. If Beatrice is in such dire need, Sister Evelyn, I replied, my voice dropping to a cool, detached whisper, I suggest you take up a special offering for her during the evening service. But my charity is officially closed. I will not be bullied into paying for a lifestyle they cannot afford. I turned and walked out of the fellowship hall, leaving Sister Evelyn sputtering in indignant rage. As I drove home, my phone began to buzz frantically. The smear campaign was spreading like wildfire. Chloe had taken the war to social media. She posted a long, tearful video on her page, cryptically talking about the deep pain of familial betrayal and the cruelty of people who worship money instead of family. She did not use my name, but the comments section was flooded with our mutual acquaintances sending prayers and condemning the wicked widow who had ruined their lives. They were trying to isolate me. They were trying to break my spirit by stripping away my entire social support system. Beatrice knew how deeply I valued my reputation. She calculated that if she made me a pariah, the public shame would eventually force me to cave, apologize, and open my checkbook just to buy back my standing in the community. But Beatrice drastically miscalculated my strength, and she completely misunderstood the nature of the woman she was attacking. I was not a fragile, image-obsessed socialite. I was a self-made wealth management advisor. I built my career by making hard, unpopular decisions and surviving in cutthroat corporate environments. I did not need their fake smiles, and I certainly did not need their toxic fellowship. Later that evening, I received a forwarded email from a former friend who had quietly decided to stay out of the drama. It was the official digital invitation for the upcoming annual church fundraising banquet. The banquet was the most highly anticipated social event of the year for our community. It was a lavish catered affair held in the grand ballroom of a local luxury hotel designed to celebrate the church's wealthy donors and community leaders. The email included a draft of the program schedule. There, right in the middle of the itinerary, was a 15-minute segment dedicated to a special prayer of healing for the Thomas family, to be led by Beatrice herself. It was the ultimate trap. Beatrice was planning to use the biggest stage of the year, in front of the most influential people in our city, to publicly pray for my hardened heart. She was going to use the microphone to formally ice me out of the community, painting herself as the merciful, victimized mother willing to forgive her wicked daughter-in-law if I just repented and returned the money. It was designed to be a public shaming so severe that I would never be able to show my face in town again unless I surrendered to her demands. I sat on the sofa in my quiet, peaceful apartment, reading the itinerary over and over again. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. Beatrice wanted a public spectacle. She wanted an audience. She wanted to stand in front of hundreds of people and talk about finances, legacy, and the truth about her son's estate. I decided right then and there that I was not going to hide. I was not going to skip the banquet and let her control the narrative. I was going to buy a premium ticket. I was going to wear my most expensive gown. And I was going to let her have the microphone. But I was not going to show up empty-handed. If Beatrice wanted to preach about the truth, I was going to provide the entire congregation with the receipts. The annual Greater Hope Fellowship fundraising banquet was always a grand spectacle. Held in the crystal ballroom of the downtown Plaza Hotel, it was a sea of glittering evening gowns, bespoke tuxedos, and quiet judgments. I arrived exactly 45 minutes late. If you are going to walk into a room full of people who have spent the entire week actively praying for your downfall, you do not slip in quietly through the back doors. You make an entrance. I wore a floor-length emerald green silk gown that fit me like a second skin. My hair was styled in flawless, sweeping waves, and I wore the heavy diamond tennis bracelet Jamal had bought me before his finances completely unraveled. I looked exactly like the senior wealth management advisor I was. Powerful, unbothered, and entirely out of their league. The moment I stepped through the heavy double doors, the lively chatter in the ballroom abruptly died down. It was like a physical wave of silence rippling through the massive room. Heads turned, eyes darted. I could see the whispers forming behind raised hands and crystal wine glasses. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my expression serenely pleasant. I glided past the round tables, offering polite nods to the church elders who suddenly looked incredibly uncomfortable. I took my assigned seat at a table near the center of the room. 2 rows ahead of me, sitting at a premium VIP table right next to the stage, was my former family. Beatrice was wearing a silver sequined dress, looking every bit the grand matriarch holding her court. Chloe sat next to her, draped in an expensive silk shawl that I had paid for 3 Christmases ago. But Tyler was the real weak link. He was sweating profusely in a suit that looked slightly too tight, his eyes darting nervously around the room. He knew exactly how close they were to absolute financial ruin, and the stress was practically vibrating off his skin. Beatrice, however, was in her absolute element. She thrived on sympathy, and tonight, she was the star martyr of the congregation. After the catered dinner of roasted chicken and prime rib was cleared away, Pastor Williams took the stage. He gave a booming, charismatic speech about the importance of charity, community, and the spiritual duty to lift each other up during times of hardship. He then opened the floor for the testimony segment. This was a long-standing church tradition where members could publicly share their struggles and victories to encourage the congregation. This was the exact moment Beatrice had been waiting for all week. Before Pastor Williams even finished his sentence, Beatrice was out of her seat. She walked slowly toward the front, leaning heavily on the wooden podium, as if the weight of her grief was simply too much for her fragile body to bear. The room grew dead silent in anticipation. She adjusted the microphone, letting out a long, shaky sigh that echoed through the massive speakers. Pastor Williams placed a comforting hand on her shoulder before stepping back into the shadows. Beatrice looked out over the sea of faces, her eyes deliberately scanning the room until they locked directly onto mine. Church family, Beatrice began, her voice trembling with perfectly calibrated emotion. I stand before you tonight with a heavy, broken heart. As many of you know, my family has endured unspeakable tragedies. We lost my beautiful son Jamal, a man who gave everything he had to provide a strong legacy for those he loved. But the deepest wounds we carry are not from the Lord calling him home. The deepest wounds come from the betrayal of those we trusted most. She paused, pulling a lace tissue from her sleeve to dab at her completely dry eyes. A collective murmur of sympathy rolled through the crowd. Sister Evelyn, sitting near the front row, nodded her head in solemn agreement. We welcomed someone into our family with open arms, Beatrice continued, her tone shifting from sorrowful to a sharp, passive-aggressive edge. We shared our home, our wealth, and our unconditional love. But the Bible tells us that the love of money is the root of all evil. And unfortunately, greed has poisoned the heart of someone who should be protecting this family. We have been cast out of our own home. My pregnant daughter and her hard-working husband have been left to suffer in the dark by a woman who worships her corporate bank account more than she respects the sacred bonds of family. The audacity of her lies hung heavy in the ballroom. People around me shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some cast glaring looks in my direction. Beatrice was putting on a masterclass in manipulation, wrapping her own financial incompetence in the untouchable armor of religious victimhood. Beatrice raised her hands toward the ceiling, closing her eyes dramatically. Lord, I pray for her soul tonight. I pray that you soften her hardened heart. I pray that you remove the terrible greed that has blinded her to her duties. I pray that the absolute truth of her actions is brought into the light, so that she may repent and restore the legacy she so selfishly stole from us. Amen. The congregation erupted into a chorus of amens and sympathetic applause. Chloe wiped away fake tears, patting her mother's hand. Tyler just stared blankly at the tablecloth, likely wishing he was anywhere else in the world, knowing full well the massive mortgage payment was due in less than 12 hours. Beatrice opened her eyes, looking down at me with a triumphant, malicious smirk. She thought she had won. She thought the sheer weight of public shame would crush me right there in my chair. She expected me to run out of the ballroom in tears, or perhaps break down and beg for forgiveness in front of the entire church just to stop the humiliation. Instead, I calmly picked up my linen napkin, dabbed the corners of my mouth, and stood up. The applause abruptly stopped. The silence that fell over the ballroom this time was not just tense, it was utterly absolute. Hundreds of eyes locked onto me as I stepped out from behind my table. I did not rush. I walked down the center aisle with the slow, measured pace of a woman who holds all the cards. The soft rustle of my silk gown and the steady click of my heels were the only sounds in the massive room. I kept my head high and my expression completely neutral. I reached the front of the room and climbed the 3 short carpeted steps onto the stage. Pastor Williams looked panicked, unsure of whether to intervene or let the drama play out. Beatrice gripped the sides of the podium, her triumphant smirk faltering slightly as I stopped right next to her. I extended my hand, palm up, waiting for her to hand over the microphone. She hesitated, her eyes flashing with sudden uncertainty. You do not belong up here, Simone, she hissed under her breath, trying to block my path. Give me the microphone, Beatrice, I whispered, my voice carrying only far enough for her to hear. You just stood up here and prayed for the truth to be brought into the light. Do not run from it now. Slowly, reluctantly, she unclasped her trembling fingers and handed it to me. She took a step back, her chest heaving with nervous breaths. I stepped up to the podium and turned to face the massive congregation. I looked at Sister Evelyn, who was clutching her pearls in shock. I looked at Chloe, whose fake tears had instantly vanished, and I looked at Tyler, who was now visibly shaking in his seat. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I did not cry, and I certainly did not apologize. I simply smiled, a cold, calculated smile, and looked up toward the sound booth at the back of the room. I gave a subtle nod to Marcus, the lead audio-visual technician. He was a bright young man whose college textbook expenses I had quietly covered last semester when his own family was struggling. He knew exactly what to do. I signaled him to switch the projector screens. The two massive digital projector screens flanking the stage suddenly went black. A second later, they flared back to life, bathing the entire crystal ballroom in a stark, bright white light. There was no scripture verse on the screen. There was no picture of my late husband. Instead, towering 20 feet high for every single member of Greater Hope Fellowship to see, was a meticulously formatted, color-coded Excel spreadsheet. It was the exact financial ledger of Jamal Thomas's estate, complete with dates, account numbers, and bank transfer receipts. A collective gasp rippled through the hundreds of people seated at the tables. I tapped the microphone twice to ensure I had their absolute attention. Beatrice just prayed for the truth to be brought into the light, I said, my voice projecting clearly and calmly across the massive room. So let us look at the light together. You have all been told a very tragic story this week. You have been told that I am a greedy widow hoarding my late husband's vast fortune. But the numbers tell a very different story. I pulled a small clicker from my clutch and advanced to the first slide. The screen zoomed in on a block of highlighted red text. Let us start with the matriarch, I continued, looking down at Beatrice, whose face had instantly drained of all color. 2 years ago, just weeks after Jamal passed away, I paid $15,000 directly to Platinum Express Credit Services. That payment was to clear the secret, maxed-out credit card debt that Beatrice had accumulated buying designer clothes and taking luxury vacations she could not afford. Jamal had been hiding her debt from the family for years, taking out high-interest personal loans to cover her tracks. When he died, the creditors came calling. I paid them off to save her from public embarrassment. I clicked to the next slide. A series of massive bank transfer receipts appeared, detailing payments to florists, caterers, and a bridal boutique. Then we have Chloe, I said, shifting my gaze to my sister-in-law. Chloe, who has spent the last week crying on social media about how I abandoned her. 3 years ago, she had the wedding of her dreams right here in this very hotel. It cost exactly $40,000. Beatrice stood in the vestibule of this church and proudly told everyone that Jamal had paid for the entire wedding as a gift to his little sister. That was a lie. Jamal's bank account was overdrawn by $200 that week. Every single cent of that $40,000 wedding was funded by my annual corporate bonus. Chloe covered her mouth with both hands, shrinking down into her chair as the women at her table openly stared at her in shock. I pressed the clicker a third time. The screen shifted to display a series of wire transfers to an unregulated digital currency exchange. And finally, we have Tyler, I announced, watching my brother-in-law begin to sweat through his suit. Tyler, who claims I am stealing his rightful family legacy. Last year, Tyler came to me begging for a bailout because he had secretly blown $20,000 of his and Chloe's savings on failed cryptocurrency ventures. He was terrified his wife would leave him. Out of pity, I replaced the money from my personal investment portfolio so he would not lose his apartment. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that follows a bomb detonation. I could see Sister Evelyn staring at the screens, her jaw physically dropped. The wealthy donors, the church elders, and the gossiping socialites were entirely paralyzed by the undeniable, documented truth staring them in the face. But the most important line item is the family estate, I said, my voice dropping to a serious, commanding tone. Beatrice told you all that Jamal bought that house in cash. He did not. He took out a $1.2 million mortgage that he could never afford. For the past 2 years, I have been secretly paying the $5,000 monthly mortgage out of my own pocket to keep Beatrice from being evicted by the bank. I funded their entire illusion of wealth. And in return, last Sunday, Beatrice served me with a 30-day eviction notice. She demanded I leave my own home so her daughter could have the master suite. So, I packed up the furniture I bought, and I left them the massive debt they so desperately wanted to claim. I looked directly at Beatrice, who was now trembling visibly, clutching the edge of her table as if the floor were falling out from beneath her. "You asked the Lord to remove my greed, Beatrice," I said, my words echoing like gunshots in the quiet room. "But my greed never existed. My charity, however, is now officially permanently closed. I will not fund your lies for another single second." Tyler suddenly jumped up from his chair, his face a mask of panicked rage. He pointed a shaking finger at the stage. "She is lying!" he screamed, his voice cracking wildly. "Those documents are forged!" "She manipulated the numbers. She is a thief!" He expected the congregation to rally behind him. He expected the elders to rush to his defense, just like they always did for Beatrice. But the social dynamics of the room had fundamentally shifted. Tyler's loud, desperate outburst only cemented his guilt. An older gentleman sitting at the table next to Tyler, a prominent local judge and major church donor, slowly stood up. He looked at Tyler with an expression of profound disgust. "Sit down, young man," the judge said firmly, his deep voice carrying authority. "You have embarrassed yourself and this community enough for one evening." Tyler opened his mouth to argue, but the people around him began to physically turn their chairs away. The entire row of church elders turned their backs on him. The wealthy socialites who had been comforting Chloe just an hour ago now looked at her with pure disdain. The meticulously crafted social standing that Beatrice had spent decades building evaporated into thin air in a matter of seconds. She was no longer the respected matriarch of a wealthy family. She was exposed as a manipulative, broke fraud who had viciously bitten the only hand feeding her. I placed the microphone gently back onto the podium. I did not need to say another word. The truth had done all the heavy lifting. I stepped down from the stage and walked back down the center aisle. This time, the silence was not born of judgment against me. It was born of absolute awe and respect. The invisible barrier that had isolated me all week was gone. People parted to let me through, some even offering quiet, apologetic nods as I passed. I walked out of the crystal ballroom and stepped into the cool night air. I handed my valet ticket to the attendant, feeling a profound sense of closure. I had defended my name, protected my peace, and permanently severed the toxic chains tying me to Jamal's ungrateful family. I drove back to my downtown apartment feeling lighter and more powerful than I had in years. The battle was over. I had won, or so I thought. I slept deeply that night, secure in the knowledge that Beatrice, Chloe, and Tyler were finally facing the absolute ruin they had brought upon themselves. But the universe has a funny way of punishing you when you underestimate the sheer desperation of cornered animals. The next morning, I woke up, poured myself a cup of fresh coffee, and sat down at my kitchen island. I picked up my phone to check my morning emails. As soon as the screen unlocked, a bright red banner notification flashed across the top of my display. It was an urgent alert from my premium credit monitoring application. I tapped the alert, assuming it was a routine update or perhaps a delayed ping from my corporate card regarding the moving company expenses. But when the dashboard loaded, my stomach violently dropped. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. Someone had just initiated a massive high-interest payday loan for $50,000. And it was fully secured against the remaining equity of the empty house, entirely under my name. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the shattered pieces of my coffee mug completely forgotten on the kitchen floor. $50,000. The alert from the Credit Monitoring Bureau was flashing bright red, indicating a hard inquiry and a newly opened line of credit. My mind raced, calculating the impossibilities. I had not applied for a loan. I did not need a loan. I quickly walked over to my laptop, opened my secure browser, and logged directly into the credit bureau portal to pull the full, detailed financial report. The lender was listed as Swift Equity Solutions, a notoriously predatory online payday lender known for exorbitant interest rates, hidden fees, and highly aggressive collection tactics. I clicked on the origin documents, my heart pounding a steady, furious rhythm against my ribs. There, attached to the digital file, was a scanned copy of the loan application. It listed the sprawling, empty estate as the primary collateral. And right there on the bottom line, next to the digital timestamp, was a crude, hastily drawn electronic forgery of my signature. Tyler. It absolutely had to be Tyler. He was the only one desperate enough, stupid enough, and arrogant enough to attempt something this legally suicidal. When Jamal and I originally signed the mountain of paperwork for that house years ago, my name was listed on the secondary deed documents as a spousal placeholder. It was a standard legal formality in our state. Even though I had voluntarily vacated the premises, handed over the keys, and successfully transferred the utility liabilities to his name, that tiny legal thread remained temporarily active in the county records until the probate court officially cleared Jamal's estate. Tyler had clearly rummaged through the empty drawers and closets of the house, desperately looking for anything he could use to save himself from the impending $5,000 mortgage payment. He must have found an old piece of mail or a discarded legal copy containing my social security number and personal verification details. In his sheer, blinding panic after the disaster at the bank, he assumed he could use my immaculate 800-plus credit score to secure a fast cash injection. He probably convinced himself that he would pay it back before I ever noticed. Or worse, he simply did not care if he destroyed my financial future to save his own skin. He thought that because I had walked away from the house, I had stopped paying attention. Any normal person would have immediately picked up the phone and dialed 911. Identity theft and mortgage fraud are serious federal crimes. I could have had police cruisers pulling up to the estate within the hour to drag Tyler out of that sweltering house in handcuffs. I could have ended it right there. But as I stared at the forged signature on my laptop screen, the initial shock evaporated entirely, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. Sending Tyler to jail right now was simply too easy. It would give Beatrice the perfect excuse to play the grieving, victimized mother once again. She would cry to the judge, blame her son-in-law's desperation on my supposed cruelty, and tie the house up in endless criminal litigation, while painting herself as the ultimate martyr. I did not want to just punish Tyler for a single crime. I wanted to completely dismantle their toxic foundation so they could never try to rebuild it. I cleaned up the broken coffee mug, changed into a sharp charcoal corporate suit, and drove straight to my office. I bypassed my desk entirely and walked directly into the corner suite of Jonathan, the senior legal counsel for our wealth management firm. Jonathan was a brilliant, ruthless corporate attorney who had successfully navigated multi-million-dollar asset liquidations, hostile takeovers, and complex financial fraud cases. I handed him my laptop, pulled up the loan application, and let him read the digital file. Jonathan leaned back in his heavy leather chair, slowly removing his reading glasses. "This is a Class 2 felony, Simone," he said, his voice grave and strictly professional. "Your brother-in-law committed wire fraud, identity theft, and loan fraud in a single click. Swift Equity Solutions is a Shark Tank. They approve loans in hours without proper underwriting, which is why he got away with this forgery. We need to contact the authorities and file a formal police report immediately to protect your assets from being seized." "I am going to file the fraud reports, Jonathan," I replied smoothly, sitting down in the chair across from his desk. "But I want to do it in a way that legally detaches me from the blast radius, while allowing the natural consequences of his absolute stupidity to destroy that house. If I report this as an active crime to the local police today, it stalls the foreclosure process. The bank will freeze the asset as evidence. Beatrice and Chloe will get to stay in the house for another year while the courts untangle the mess. I want the bank to take the house this week." Jonathan raised an eyebrow, a slow, predatory smile forming on his face as his legal mind caught up to exactly what I was proposing. You want to let the fraudulent loan default? Exactly, I said, leaning forward. I want to freeze my credit at the federal level and submit the official fraud affidavits directly to the national bureaus and the Federal Trade Commission. This completely and legally protects me from the $50,000 debt. I will have the federal paper trail proving I did not authorize the transaction. But because Swift Equity Solutions operates outside of standard banking regulations, the moment they receive formal notice from the federal government that the signature is fraudulent and the debt is invalid, they will panic. They will immediately trigger a default clause on the collateral. Jonathan nodded, pulling out a legal pad and his gold fountain pen to quickly draft the timeline. They will cross-report the critical default to Premier National Bank, the primary mortgage holder, he said, his eyes lighting up with professional appreciation for the strategy. Precisely, I continued. Premier National Bank is already waiting for their $5,000 payment tomorrow morning, a payment that Tyler absolutely cannot make. When the primary bank sees a fraudulent secondary lien placed against the property by a predatory lender, they will instantly recognize the asset is in severe jeopardy. They will accelerate the primary loan to protect their massive investment. They will demand the entire $1.2 million balance immediately, which will trigger an automatic, expedited foreclosure. It was a perfectly legal, utterly devastating trap. By doing everything strictly by the book, I was going to trigger a massive financial avalanche that Tyler could not possibly outrun. He had foolishly tied his own name and his own terrible credit to the deposit accounts that received the stolen funds. By the time the dust settled, Tyler would be facing the wrath of a predatory lender, an aggressive foreclosing bank, and the impending hammer of a federal fraud indictment. Let us file the federal paperwork, Jonathan said, turning back to his computer keyboard. We will lock your credit down tight and send the certified fraud notices to the lenders by noon today. Then, we simply step back and watch the show. I spent the rest of the afternoon meticulously filling out the federal identity theft affidavits. I did not call Beatrice. I did not text Chloe. I did not threaten Tyler. I simply built a bulletproof legal wall around my own finances and let the system do exactly what it was designed to do. Instead of calling the police immediately, my lawyer and I set a much more devastating, perfectly legal trap. And now, the countdown to absolute ruin had officially begun. The first step in my trap was entirely invisible. Over the next 48 hours, I did absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. I went to work, I enjoyed my morning coffee, I met with my high-net-worth clients. But behind the scenes, the heavy machinery of the federal financial system was quietly locking into place. Once the fraud affidavits were processed by the Federal Trade Commission, the credit bureaus slapped a permanent security freeze on my profile. Swift Equity Solutions, the predatory online lender Tyler had used, received the official notification by certified mail. Their reaction was instantaneous and entirely predictable. Predatory lenders do not politely ask for clarification when they are informed of federal wire fraud. They panic. Realizing they had just wired $50,000 to a fraudulent account without securing a valid signature, they immediately scrambled to protect their money. They triggered the emergency default clause on the loan. To salvage their claim, they officially registered the default with the county clerk and notified the primary lien holder on the property. That primary lien holder was Premier National Bank. Premier National Bank was already on high alert. They had not received their $5,000 mortgage payment for the month. But a missed payment is usually met with a standard 30-day grace period and a few polite phone calls. However, when the risk management department at Premier National Bank saw that a predatory secondary lender had placed a defaulted, fraudulent lien against their $1.2 million asset, the polite phone calls ceased immediately. The bank invoked the acceleration clause in the original mortgage contract. This clause allows the bank to demand the entire remaining balance of the loan immediately if the asset is deemed to be in severe financial or legal jeopardy. Tyler and Chloe were completely oblivious to the legal storm gathering right above their heads. They were still sitting in that sweltering, empty house, eating fast food and arguing about the lack of air conditioning. They thought they had bought themselves a month of time with the stolen $50,000. Tyler had used a portion of the stolen funds to pay off his maxed-out credit cards and reinstate his leased luxury car, foolishly assuming the rest could be slowly fed to the mortgage company over the next few months. He thought he was a genius. His genius lasted exactly 5 days. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the heavy knock echoed through the empty foyer of the estate. Tyler opened the door, expecting a package delivery. Instead, he found a uniformed process server standing on the front porch. The server did not say a word. He simply handed Tyler a thick stack of legal documents, turned around, and walked back to his car. A bright neon orange notice was aggressively taped to the center of the heavy mahogany front door. It was a formal notice of accelerated foreclosure. Tyler tore the documents open, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped the pages. The bank was not asking for $5,000 anymore. They were demanding $1.2 million, payable in full within 14 days, or the property would be seized and sold at public auction. Furthermore, the documents explicitly cited the fraudulent secondary lien as the trigger for the acceleration. The realization of what he had done hit Tyler like a freight train. The bank knew about the forged loan. The federal authorities knew about the fraud. He was not just losing the house anymore. He was looking down the barrel of a federal indictment for identity theft and wire fraud. Chloe came downstairs complaining about the noise and saw her husband leaning against the wall, hyperventilating. She read the orange sticker on the door and snatched the papers from his hands. When her pampered eyes scanned the numbers and the aggressive legal language, the fragile, fractured illusion of their marriage shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She completely lost her mind. Chloe screamed at Tyler, her voice echoing wildly through the empty house. She called him a failure, a criminal, and a coward. She realized that her husband had not only failed to provide the luxurious life he promised, but he had actively dragged her into a federal crime that was going to leave them homeless and publicly disgraced. Tyler, backed into a corner and terrified of going to prison, abandoned any remaining pretense of being a loving husband. He screamed right back at her. He blamed Chloe for being high maintenance. He blamed her for demanding an expensive lifestyle he could never afford. But most of all, he blamed Beatrice. Tyler dragged Chloe by the arm out to his freshly reinstated leased car, and they drove recklessly to Beatrice's pristine suburban home. They burst through her front door without knocking, bringing their toxic chaos directly into her quiet living room. Beatrice was sitting on her velvet sofa, sipping tea, when Tyler threw the foreclosure documents onto her expensive glass coffee table. "You need to fix this," Tyler demanded, his face red and slick with sweat. "The bank is taking the house. They know about the payday loan. Simone flagged it as fraud. I am going to be arrested, Beatrice. You need to sell this house." Beatrice looked at the documents, her eyes widening in absolute horror. "Sell my house," she repeated, her voice dropping to a shocked whisper. "Yes," Tyler yelled, pacing the room like a caged animal. "You promised us that estate. You lied to us about Jamal's money. You made me break my lease. Now you need to sell your house, cash out your retirement, and pay off the bank. You need to cover the $50,000 so the payday lender does not press charges. You have to save us." Chloe fell to her knees in front of her mother, sobbing hysterically. "Please, Mom, we have nowhere to go. Tyler is going to jail. You have to sell your house. You can come live with us in the estate once it is paid off." Beatrice looked at her weeping daughter and her frantic criminal son-in-law. For her entire life, Beatrice had demanded absolute loyalty and sacrifice from everyone around her. She expected Jamal to drown in debt to fund her lifestyle. She expected me to endure abuse and pay her bills to honor her family. But when the roles were finally reversed, when she was the one being asked to sacrifice her own comfort, her true nature was entirely exposed. Beatrice stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her skirt. She looked down at her daughter with cold, unyielding self-preservation. "Absolutely not," Beatrice said firmly. "I am not selling my home to cover the massive, idiotic mistakes of a man who committed federal fraud. I am a respected woman in this community. I will not end up on the street because you married a reckless, incompetent fool." The absolute rejection hung in the air. The toxic alliance that had fueled their cruelty toward me completely evaporated in that living room. Tyler cursed at Beatrice, calling her a selfish hypocrite. Chloe sobbed, realizing her mother loved her own comfort far more than she loved her child. The family was entirely broken, devoured by the exact same greed and entitlement they had tried to project onto me. They were completely out of options. The bank was circling. The federal authorities were building their case. The massive estate was slipping through their fingers, and their social standing was already a pile of ashes. Later that evening, a fierce thunderstorm rolled through the city. I was sitting in my warm, quiet apartment, reviewing my client portfolios for the upcoming week. The soft jazz playing on my sound system was suddenly interrupted by a sharp chime from my smart home application. I picked up my phone and opened the security camera feed connected to the main lobby of my luxury corporate apartment building. Downstairs, standing just outside the heavy glass doors, the pouring rain soaking right through her clothes, was a broken, desperate figure. Through the grainy night vision of the security feed, I recognized the soaked designer suit and the ruined silk scarf. It was Beatrice. She was standing in the torrential downpour, pressing her hands against the reinforced glass of my building's entrance. The thunderstorm was raging around her, bright flashes of lightning illuminating her haggard, terrified face. She looked absolutely pathetic, entirely stripped of all her haughty country club grandeur. I could have easily pressed the ignore button on my control panel. I could have left her out there to face the bitter storm she had created for herself. But part of me needed to see this in person. I needed to look directly into her eyes when she finally realized that her cruel actions had irreversible consequences. I instructed the front desk concierge through the intercom to let her into the vestibule, but strictly ordered him not to let her pass the security gates. Then, I stepped onto the private elevator and took it down to the lobby. When the polished silver doors slid open, the temperature in the lobby felt incredibly cold. Beatrice was standing on the imported marble floor, shivering violently. Her meticulously styled hair was plastered flat to her skull, and expensive mascara ran down her cheeks in dark, messy streaks. The heavy pearl necklace she always wore like a crown now looked like a chain dragging her down. She saw me approach and immediately lunged forward, pressing her face near the heavy metal bars of the security gate. "Simone," she gasped, her voice hoarse and broken over the sound of the rain hitting the glass. "Thank God. Please, you have to help me. I have nowhere else to turn." I stood a few feet away, my arms folded across my chest, completely unmoved by her tears. "You are trespassing, Beatrice?" I said flatly. "State your business, or I will have the night security team escort you back out into the rain." She flinched at my cold tone, but pure desperation quickly overrode her pride. She reached through the metal bars of the gate, her hands trembling uncontrollably. "It is Tyler," she sobbed, the words tumbling out of her mouth in a frantic, hysterical rush. "He ruined everything. He forged your signature to take out a payday loan. The bank found out about the fraud. They are foreclosing on the house right now. They accelerated the mortgage, Simone. They are demanding the entire $1.2 million by Thursday, or they are putting the estate up for public auction. Tyler is facing federal prison. Chloe is going to be homeless. You have to save us." I simply looked at her. "I already know all of this, Beatrice," I replied smoothly. "I am the one who filed the federal fraud affidavits. I am the one who let the forged loan default. I set the legal trap, and your arrogant son-in-law walked right into it." Beatrice gasped, her eyes widening in sheer terror as the reality of my words washed over her. "You did this," she whispered, stepping back from the gate as if I had physically struck her. You destroyed my family on purpose. You destroyed your own family, I corrected her, my voice echoing loudly and firmly in the cavernous lobby. You kicked me out of my own home. You tried to steal my furniture. You launched a vicious smear campaign at our church to publicly humiliate me. You demanded a free ride on the back of my hard work. And when I stopped pulling the wagon, you let your lazy son-in-law commit a federal crime. I did not destroy anything, Beatrice. I just stopped protecting you from yourselves. She collapsed to her knees on the cold marble, her soaked clothes pooling around her. She was weeping uncontrollably now, abandoning every single ounce of the dignity she had spent her entire life cultivating. Please, Simone, I am begging you, she cried, looking up at me with sheer agony. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. I am sorry for the eviction. I am sorry for the banquet. Just please, buy the house from the bank. You have the money. You are the only one who can afford it. Buy the property and let us stay. Do it for Jamal. Do it for the family legacy. I promise we will respect you. I will do whatever you want. Just do not let us lose the estate. I looked down at the woman who had tormented me for years. I saw the absolute desperation in her eyes, the pathetic clinging to a high society status that no longer existed. I felt absolutely nothing but a profound sense of finality. I stepped closer to the gate, looking down at her kneeling form. Jamal was the legacy, Beatrice, I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, devastating whisper. He was the only good thing about this family. And you treated his widow like trash. You chewed me up and tried to spit me out the second you thought you did not need me anymore. Your son's legacy died the moment you slid that eviction notice across my dining table. I paused, letting the heavy silence stretch between us, so my next words would hit with maximum impact. I am not buying the house to save you. The bank auctions the property on Thursday morning. Good luck finding a new place to live. I turned my back on her and began walking away. Simone Beatrice screamed, her voice cracking in pure, unadulterated panic. Simone, do not leave me here. You cannot do this. Please. I did not look back. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for my floor, and watched through the closing doors as Beatrice collapsed entirely, sobbing hysterically onto the wet marble floor, while the security guards moved in to forcefully escort her off the premises. The heavy doors clicked shut, severing my emotional ties to her forever. The next 48 hours passed with a quiet, relentless finality. Thursday morning arrived with a bright, mocking sunshine that stood in stark contrast to the absolute misery unfolding at the estate. While I was drinking my morning tea in the comfort of my high-rise, Tyler and Chloe were frantically tossing their meager belongings into heavy-duty black trash bags. They did not even have the money to purchase proper moving boxes. They had rented a cheap, rusted U-Haul truck, the only vehicle they could afford with Tyler's completely destroyed credit score. Their marriage was functioning purely on spite and mutual hatred at this point. They screamed at each other over every dropped item and every wasted dollar, their voices echoing off the bare drywall of the master suite. The bank had officially seized the property at midnight, and the local sheriff's department was already scheduled to arrive by noon to enforce the physical lockout. Simultaneously, downtown at the county courthouse, the public foreclosure auction commenced. The grand estate, once the pride and joy of Beatrice's fabricated social empire, was listed on the county docket as a highly distressed asset. The starting bid was aggressively low, set by Premier National Bank just to recoup the remaining principal and clear the massive legal headache Tyler had created with his fraudulent secondary loan. A handful of seasoned real estate developers and local property investors gathered in the echoing halls of the courthouse, holding their numbered bidding paddles. The auctioneer rattled off the property description, legally noting the severe financial encumbrances, the gutted interior, and the recent utility shutoffs. The bidding opened and closed in a matter of minutes. It was not a drawn-out bidding war. The local developers quickly backed out when a single, decisive cash bid was placed by a sharp-suited legal representative acting on behalf of a private corporate entity. The gavel slammed down loudly against the wooden podium, finalizing the transaction. Sold, the auctioneer announced, officially transferring the deed. The $2 million property was purchased for absolute pennies on the dollar, completely wiping out the previous debts and legally severing all financial ties to the Thomas family. The winner of the auction was a newly registered mysterious, limited liability company that had been formed just 48 hours prior. Tyler, Chloe, and Beatrice had absolutely no idea who had just bought the roof over their heads. They only knew they had to be off the premises before the police arrived. But as they dragged their heavy trash bags down the long, sweeping driveway, a sleek black town car was already turning onto the street, carrying the new landlord, who was about to deliver the final, cinematic blow. The oppressive morning humidity hung over the massive estate like a heavy wet blanket. I sat comfortably in the air-conditioned back seat of the sleek black town car, parked discreetly just down the street, watching the pathetic final act of their downfall unfold through the tinted windows. It was moving day in reverse, a complete and utter degradation of the grand family exit they had envisioned. Instead of a fleet of premium commercial movers carefully wrapping expensive furniture, there was only a rusted, dented U-Haul truck parked illegally on the pristine front lawn. Tyler, Chloe, and Beatrice had been completely stripped of their dignity. Through the open windows of my car, I could hear them screaming at each other over the suffocating summer heat. Tyler was sweating profusely, his face bright red as he dragged a heavy-duty black trash bag across the driveway. The cheap plastic caught on a stray pebble and ripped wide open, spilling Chloe's expensive designer shoes and tangled clothing onto the dirty concrete. Chloe let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. She rushed forward, abandoning the small cardboard box she was carrying, and began slapping Tyler on the shoulder. She screamed that he was ruining her life, that he was a useless provider, and that she was going to divorce him the second they got out of this nightmare. Tyler threw his hands up, his voice cracking violently as he roared right back at her, blaming her endless spending habits for driving him to commit federal fraud. Sitting a few feet away on a cheap plastic lawn chair was Beatrice. She did not look like the untouchable matriarch of a wealthy congregation anymore. She looked entirely broken. She was wearing a faded house dress, staring blankly at the torn trash bags and her fighting children. She had lost her social standing, her church community, and her fabricated legacy, all in the span of a few brutal weeks. I tapped the glass partition dividing me from the driver. "Take us up to the driveway," I instructed quietly. The heavy luxury engine purred to life. The town car slowly rolled down the street and turned into the sweeping driveway, the thick tires crunching loudly against the pristine gravel. The sound immediately silenced the screaming match on the lawn. Tyler froze, dropping the torn trash bag. Chloe wiped her tear-streaked face, her eyes widening in panic. They both stared at the approaching vehicle, entirely convinced that the mysterious new corporate landlord had arrived to conduct the final walkthrough and demand the keys. Tyler frantically wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his dirty arm. He aggressively hissed at Chloe to stop crying and look presentable. I watched him physically try to pull himself together, shifting back into the arrogant, entitled persona he always used to talk his way out of trouble. He was undoubtedly preparing a pathetic, groveling speech, ready to beg the new property owner for a 3-day extension so they would not have to sleep in the back of a rented moving truck. The driver placed the car in park, stepped out into the humid air, and walked around to open my door. I stepped out of the back seat, wearing a perfectly tailored ivory business suit, holding a sleek leather clipboard in my hand. The absolute shock that washed over the three of them was nothing short of cinematic. Tyler took a staggering step backward, his face instantly draining of all color. He looked as though he had just seen a ghost. Chloe gasped loudly, her hand flying to her mouth. Beatrice slowly stood up from her plastic lawn chair, her eyes darting wildly between the luxury town car and my immaculate suit. "What are you doing here, Simone?" Chloe snapped, her voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and lingering entitlement. The bank took the house. You do not live here anymore. If you came to gloat, you can just turn around and leave. The new owner is going to be here any minute, and I am sure they will not appreciate you trespassing on their property. I smiled calmly, looking down at my clipboard, then back up at her furious face. I am not trespassing, Chloe, I replied, my voice projecting clearly over the low hum of the town car. I am simply conducting the final property inspection for the new legal owner. Tyler's eyes lit up with a desperate, pathetic glimmer of hope. He completely ignored the reality of what I was saying and focused only on what he wanted to hear. You work for the new owner? He stammered, taking a step toward me. Simone, listen to me. You have to tell them we need an extension. The bank did not give us enough time to pack. Tell your boss we just need until Monday. We can pay a daily rental fee. Please, you have to talk to them for us. I looked at Tyler, feeling a profound sense of pity for his absolute stupidity. I do not work for Vanguard Holdings LLC. Tyler, I said, enunciating every single syllable with crystal clear precision. I am Vanguard Holdings LLC. The words hung in the humid air, heavy and devastating. Tyler blinked, his brain completely failing to process the information. I formed the proxy corporation 48 hours ago, I continued, speaking in the slow, patient tone one might use to explain a very simple concept to a very slow child. When the bank accelerated your defaulted loan and put this estate up for public auction this morning, my LLC placed the winning cash bid. I bought this entire property for pennies on the dollar. Do you understand what that means, Tyler? It means the massive $1.2 million debt that Jamal left behind has been completely wiped clean. I now own this house outright, free and clear, and I did not have to forge a single signature to do it. Tyler looked like he was going to vomit. His knees literally buckled, and he had to lean against the side of the rusted U-Haul to keep from collapsing onto the driveway. Chloe stared at me in absolute paralyzed horror, finally realizing the sheer magnitude of the trap they had walked into. Oh, and speaking of forged signatures, I added, my tone dropping to a cold, razor-sharp edge. I received a lovely update from my corporate attorney this morning. The Federal Trade Commission has officially processed the fraud paperwork. The United States Attorney's Office is currently reviewing the wire fraud and identity theft charges against you. Swift Equity Solutions is pressing full criminal charges to recoup their stolen $50,000. Your credit is permanently destroyed, Tyler. You are facing multiple felony indictments. You are going to federal prison. Tyler let out a guttural, wretched sound, burying his face in his dirty hands. Chloe did not rush to comfort him. Instead, she backed away from him in sheer disgust, realizing her entire life was permanently tethered to a convicted felon. Then, the most pathetic thing of all happened. Beatrice, who had been standing silently by the lawn chair, slowly walked toward me. Her eyes were completely vacant, her mind entirely broken by the sheer reality of her absolute defeat. She stopped a few feet away from me, wringing her hands together in a gesture of pure subservience. Simone, she whispered, her voice cracking pitifully. You own the house now. It is yours. I understand that. But please, I cannot live in a cramped apartment. I am the mother of Jamal Thomas. I belong in this estate. Can I please just rent the guest room from you? I will pay you whatever you want. I will clean the floors. Just please do not make me leave my legacy. I stared at the woman who had tormented me, manipulated my husband, and tried to destroy my reputation. I looked at her desperate, tear-stained face, and I did the only thing I could do. I laughed. It was not a cruel, villainous cackle. It was a genuine, echoing laugh of pure disbelief. The sheer audacity required to ask to rent a room in the very house she had aggressively evicted me from was absolutely staggering. Rent a room, I repeated, shaking my head slowly. Beatrice, you completely misunderstand the situation. I have absolutely no intention of living in this house. This house is tainted by your greed, your lies, and Jamal's hidden debts. I would never sleep a single night under this roof. I turned away from her and raised my hand high into the air, signaling toward the end of the block. A loud, heavy rumble began to vibrate through the concrete driveway. The sound of massive diesel engines echoed through the quiet suburban neighborhood. Turning the corner onto the street was a convoy of heavy construction machinery. Two massive yellow excavators and a commercial bulldozer rolled slowly toward the front of the property, their heavy treads churning against the asphalt. "What is that?" Chloe shrieked, covering her ears as the deafening noise grew closer. "What are you doing?" "I am tearing it down," I announced, projecting my voice over the roar of the engines. "I am having the demolition crew strip this house down to the foundation. Every single brick, every piece of drywall, every memory of your toxic entitlement is going to be pulverized into dust. Once the land is cleared, I am building a state-of-the-art community center for underprivileged youth. I am going to fund it entirely myself, and I am going to name it the Jamal Thomas Youth Center. A real, honest legacy built on actual charity, not stolen money and fake prestige." Tyler suddenly snapped. The overwhelming pressure of the federal charges, the ruined marriage, and the total loss of the property completely broke his mind. He pushed away from the U-Haul and sprinted toward me, his face twisted in violent rage. "You cannot tear down my house," he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "This is my property. You tricked us. I am not leaving. I am not letting you destroy my family." He planted his feet in the middle of the driveway, crossing his arms and aggressively blocking the path of the approaching bulldozers. He looked absolutely unhinged. A pathetic man throwing a temper tantrum in a desperate bid to reclaim a power he never actually possessed. I did not flinch. I calmly lifted my left arm and checked my diamond wristwatch. "You do not have a choice, Tyler," I said softly. And right on cue, the sharp, piercing wail of police sirens cut through the humid morning air. Two black and white county sheriff cruisers turned onto the street, their red and blue lights flashing brilliantly against the heavy machinery. They bypassed the bulldozers and pulled directly onto the lawn, boxing in the rusted U-Haul truck. "I called the sheriff's department 10 minutes before I arrived," I explained, looking at Tyler's terrified face. "The eviction deadline expired at midnight. The bank transferred the deed to me at 9 o'clock this morning. You are officially trespassing on my private property, and I requested a full police escort to ensure you vacate the premises immediately." Four uniformed deputies stepped out of the cruisers, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. They took one look at Tyler's aggressive posture and immediately moved in. "Sir, step away from the woman and get your hands where I can see them," the lead deputy barked, his voice carrying the absolute authority Tyler had always pretended to have. "The property has been legally seized. You and your family need to get into your vehicle and vacate the premises right now, or you will all be arrested for criminal trespassing." Tyler's false bravery evaporated instantly. He raised his shaking hands in the air and backed away, completely submissive under the threat of real consequences. The deputies forced him, Chloe, and Beatrice to rapidly throw the rest of their torn trash bags into the back of the truck. They were not allowed to properly pack. They were not allowed to take a final look around. They were treated exactly like the criminals they were. Beatrice climbed into the passenger seat of the U-Haul, pulling her ruined sweater tightly around her shoulders. She did not look at me. She just stared blankly out the dirty windshield, completely destroyed. Chloe climbed into the middle seat, sobbing quietly into her hands. Tyler got behind the steering wheel, his hands shaking so violently he could barely turn the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered and whined before finally turning over, belching a cloud of dark exhaust into the pristine suburban air. I stood on the manicured lawn, the cool breeze from the approaching storm finally breaking the humidity, and watched them drive away. The rusted U-Haul slowly rolled down the street, flanked by the flashing lights of the police cruisers, until it turned the corner and completely disappeared from my sight. Their toxic grip on my life was permanently severed. I turned around and looked up at the massive, empty house. The excavators were already moving into position on the lawn. The demolition was about to begin, and for the first time in years, my future was entirely my own to build. It has been exactly 1 year since the heavy yellow excavators tore that massive estate down to its foundation. Today, I am standing in the exact same spot where that imposing mahogany front door used to be. But instead of an empty, echoing monument to hidden debt and toxic entitlement, there is a vibrant, state-of-the-art building filled with natural light and genuine hope. The Jamal Thomas Youth Center is officially open. The ribbon-cutting ceremony this morning was beautiful. The mayor attended, along with several prominent community leaders and dozens of local families. As I used the oversized golden scissors to cut the thick red ribbon across the front entrance, I looked around at the facility I had built from the ground up. The center features a fully equipped computer lab for after-school tutoring, an indoor basketball court, and a financial literacy classroom designed specifically to teach teenagers the real value of money and credit. It is a living, breathing testament to everything Jamal could have been if he had not been crushed under the weight of his mother's endless expectations. This is his true legacy. It is built on actual charity, community enrichment, and solid financial planning, completely free from the suffocating lies of the past. While this center thrives and breathes new life into the neighborhood, the people who tried to destroy me are currently living out the exact consequences of their own actions. The justice system was not gentle with Tyler. He managed to avoid federal prison by taking a severe plea deal, but he is now a convicted felon. He is currently serving 5 years of strict probation. As part of his plea agreement, he was ordered to pay full restitution to Swift Equity Solutions. To meet those court-ordered payments, he is working the overnight shift loading boxes at a local distribution warehouse, making slightly above minimum wage. It is the exact same manual labor job I sarcastically suggested he take during that fateful lunch with Beatrice. Chloe divorced him the absolute second the felony charges were formally filed. She completely abandoned him to face the legal system alone, desperately trying to salvage her own reputation. But the damage was already done. She and Beatrice now live together in a cramped, outdated 2-bedroom apartment on the far outskirts of the city. Their grand social empire completely evaporated the night I projected those financial receipts onto the screens at the fundraising banquet. Greater Hope Fellowship entirely ostracized them. The prominent church elders who used to fawn over Beatrice now actively cross the street to avoid speaking to her. The wealthy socialites who used to attend Chloe's lavish parties have blocked her phone number. Without Jamal's borrowed money and my corporate salary to fund their extravagant lifestyles, they were instantly exposed as the manipulative frauds they always were. Beatrice spends her days sitting in a small, air-conditioned apartment, bitterly complaining to a daughter who blames her for absolutely everything. They are trapped in a prison of their own making, bound together by mutual resentment and a mountain of unpaid bills. Standing here today, looking at the children laughing and learning in a space built from the ashes of my past, I feel a profound, unshakable sense of peace. As a Black woman, society often expects us to be the endless shock absorbers for everyone else's dysfunction. We are conditioned to carry the heavy weight, to fiercely protect the public image of the family at all costs, and to suffer in absolute silence so that others can comfortably shine. We are told that loyalty means enduring disrespect, and that being a strong woman means you must endlessly sacrifice your own well-being for the sake of the collective. But I am here to tell you that your peace is not the price of admission for someone else's comfort. Your financial stability is not a charity fund for entitled relatives. I had to learn the hard way that family is not defined purely by biological ties, marriage certificates, or shared history. True family is defined by mutual respect, unwavering support, and absolute honesty. When people show you that they only value you for what they can extract from you, believe them the very first time. I walked away from the people who were drowning me, and in doing so, I finally learned how to breathe. I stopped protecting their fragile egos and started fiercely protecting my own future. It was the hardest, most painful decision of my life, but it was also the most necessary. The collapse of that toxic dynamic forced me to rebuild my life on a foundation of unshakable truth, and I have never been more proud of the woman I am today. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your own future and sanity? How did you handle the backlash when you finally chose yourself over their expectations? I would love to read your stories in the comments below. If you found value in my journey today, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about resilience, financial empowerment, and taking back your power. Thank you for listening.